The Policy and Planning Committee of Thursday the 20th of August 2026. I will open with a karakia tīmataka. Tū taua mai I ruka, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tau I te Māori tū, te Māori ora ki te katoa. Haumea hui tai ki e. Councillor Lucas is an apology for today's meeting, and Councillor Walker will assist as Deputy Chair for the meeting. There is no public forum. Apologies have been received from Councillor Cherry Lucas, Councillor Andrew Sims and Ms Nadia Wesley-Smith. Are there any further apologies? Therefore, I move that the committee accepts apologies from Councillor Cherry Lucas, Councillor Andrew Sims and Ms Nadia Wesley-Smith, seconded Councillor Walker. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions, that is carried. Now, the confirmation of the agenda. I move that the committee confirms the agenda without additional alteration. Seconded Councillor Walker. Put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions, that is carried. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded of the need to stand aside from decision making when a conflict arises between their role as an elected representative and any private or other external interests they might have. Are there any updates? Therefore, I move that the committee notes the elected member interest register attached as attachment A and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Seconded Councillor Walker. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions, that is carried. Move to the confirmation of the minutes. Are there any questions, additions from the minutes? Therefore, I move that the committee confirms the minutes of the Policy and Planning Committee held on the 18th of June 2026 as a correct record. Seconded Councillor Walker. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions, that is carried. I'll move to the reports. Report 7, update report on the Dunedin economy for the year to March 2026, page 19. The report provides an overview of Dunedin's economic performance as to 31 March 2026, including key economic indicators and trends, and highlighted comparative data for Dunedin, selected cities and national results. So coming to the table will be the General Manager, Arts, Culture and Economic Development, Mike Costello. We're missing one. Team Leader Economic Development, Anthony Deaker, and via Zoom, Infometrics Principal Economist and Lead Demographer, Nick Brunsden. Welcome, Nick, to respond to any questions. Welcome, everybody. Do you have any opening?
Yes, I'd like to make one brief comment and then hand over to Nick to make a few comments. I'd like to acknowledge our colleague David Lee, who has done the research that informs the data analysis in here. Also like to just pass regards and apologies from Sian, who has the flu today. With the in-house capability to really dig into data out of public sources, we've also been able to work more effectively across council and to other teams, and sort of as a pre-selling the next papers coming out from us, we've been working with the writers in the long-term plan to look at rates affordability, and that ties back to an economic development focus around disposable income. So it's really an expression of our excitement about having this capability in-house to work across the team. We're also working with the spatial planners on North Dunedin review at the moment. But I'd like to hand over to Nick, because the figures that we shared to the end of March have just been updated in the last week. They're not publicly available yet. Okay. So Nick's going to open with a few comments that bring us up to date with the figures to the end of June. Hand over to you, Nick, and thank you so much for being available this morning.
Is it right if I share slides?
Yep. Is that okay? We'll be able to see them, will we? Do we need to do anything? We'll just try to get the technicalities right.
No worries. So the data is actually fresh off the press. We put out the June 2026 quarterly economic monitor this morning. Technically, it went public at 5 a.m. So I thought it was a good opportunity to present the latest data. The key advantage there is that the economy is evolving. We've come out of a recession, and so it is. The June data, as opposed to the March data, does show Dunedin pulling further out of the recession. Looks like I've been denied sharing. I might just talk to it then, because that's going to work best.
So can I just check, Nick, I looked on the website this morning and I saw that the latest data to June was on the website. I'm just going to share the link with councillors. I've just sent round the link to the Infometrics data on the website. Maybe if you want to speak to it.
Yep, no, cool. So firstly, from the top, GDP, gross domestic product for Dunedin rose 1.1% in the year to June 2026. Pretty solid recovery in itself. A little bit slower than the national economy, which grew 1.7%, but again, Dunedin didn't fall by quite as much in the recession through 24 and 25. So that does put Dunedin in a, with Dunedin having not fallen as much, wouldn't expect quite as stronger growth at the other side. So that's really encouraging. We are at kind of the tentative stage of the economic recovery, and obviously having events in Iran has knocked things around a little bit. Employment is still soft, and so we're sort of at the point where economic activity, sort of receipts, money through the till is ever so slightly starting to recover. I'll try to find my link. I think it's working.
Oh yeah, we can see it now. Excellent.
Cool. So this is what I spoke to previously, just showing Dunedin's recovery at 1.1%, a little bit slower than New Zealand, but again, not as much lost ground to be regaining. On the employment side of things, it's a bit more tentative. Business activity is starting to pick up, but it's not quite at the level overall where we're starting to see businesses needing to hire more people. And in fact, some industries are still contracting a little bit. So the hope is that as economic activity continues to pick up over the coming quarters, it starts to reach that point where businesses actually need to bring on more resource and have enough certainty in the future that they feel like they can bring that extra resource on. So the number of jobs rose 0.2% in the quarter, up from the June quarter last year, but on an annual basis, it was down 0.3%. So it's still pretty tentative. If we look at how this is playing out on an industry level, firstly, the high-level comment is roughly about half of industries are growing and half are still in contraction. And I think that kind of speaks to that kind of overall pretty muted employment growth figure that we're seeing. Areas like the public sector, health, construction, doing a little bit better, but we are still seeing softness in a range of industries, including some parts of tourism and sort of and hospitality as well. So it is still a pretty delicate recovery. To provide a bit of regional context, when we look nationally, the South Island really is leading the country's recovery. Job growth is up 1%, or number of jobs is up 1% in Otago, 1.7% across Southland, 1.4% across Canterbury. And the heat map makes it pretty clear. When we look to the North Island, we're seeing really Bay of Plenty, Waikato driving that growth, and not really a lot elsewhere. And from a national economy point of view, we're not really going to hit our paces on this recovery until we start seeing Auckland, which is a third of the national economy, starting to join that party. But I guess it's particularly the South Island context is useful. Dunedin does sit within a relatively strong part of the country, and some of that is strong primary sector returns, strong dairy prices, strong meat prices, and Dunedin does have a place in that broader supply chain, broader ecosystem, and some of that that will be flowing through to businesses in Dunedin and the likes of professional services. In terms of consumer spending, so this is measuring the value of card spending through Dunedin retailers in the past year, up 1.1% technically, but broadly you look at the line and it's essentially been flat for 2 years. That's the reality that retailers are facing, and this is in dollar terms. We know there's been substantial inflation, 4.1% inflation in the year to June 2026. So what that means is that in real terms, people are buying less. They're walking out of the shops with fewer bags than they were a year ago, fewer than they were 2 years ago. So it is still a challenging scene for local retailers. Again, putting that in a little bit of perspective, that 0.8% growth in Dunedin is encouraging, but if we look nationally, it does put Dunedin at the lower end. What that says is that local consumers are still playing things pretty safe, and even if if they're improving their economic condition, they're not necessarily rushing out to spend any gains and looking to hold on to things. And that's what we do find in a recession. Unemployment doesn't touch most households, but it does provide a little bit of a chill and a bit of a note of caution to households to just play things safe on the sort of finance front. On the tourism side of things, broadly, tourism guest nights have been steady since they recovered. Technically, we had a little bit of a rise over the past year. We're still seeing international tourism growing. International guest nights in Dunedin rose 5.5% in the past year. Domestic rose just 1.6%. And in many parts of the country, we're still seeing retreat in domestic guest nights because New Zealand households are quite strained financially, and naturally, one of the things you sort of chop off when you're trying to make your budget balance is your sort of travel and holidays. We are still seeing a fair bit of growth in international tourism, even though obviously fuel prices are high and there's a bit of global disruption. We are seeing a shift, though. A lot of tourists coming into Queenstown, Christchurch, more growth there than the likes of Auckland. And also, we're seeing Australian and Chinese tourists sort of the key drivers of growth at the moment, with quite a bit of softness in North American and European tourists because they're generally long-haul tourists, so the fuel price is a much bigger influence on their travel patterns. We're on to construction. So naturally, construction is down a little bit from where it was in that 2022 peak, but still pretty strong here in Dunedin. 1.5% growth in residential building consents, which provides a little bit of a lift in the level of construction activity. On the non-residential side, construction volume consents are down quite a bit. Bearing in mind, we have had some larger consents for parts of the hospital build come through in previous years, and they are going to they create work that persists for several years. So it's not necessarily a concerning picture for me to see that drop off. We know there is quite a bit of work in the pipeline across the city. And finally, just a bit of bringing it home, I guess, in terms of house prices. We've seen relatively modest growth in house values over the past year, up 3.7% in Dunedin, with a little bit of a tail off nationally. There's still about $240,000, $220,000 gap between the average price of Dunedin houses and New Zealand prices. But not only that, this housing affordability is still quite favourable in Dunedin. The average house value is about 5 times the average household income in Dunedin compared to 5.9 times nationally. So you sort of have quite a strong advantage in terms of housing affordability. That brings me to a whirlwind close. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I have Councillor Gary, then Councillor Lund. Councillor Gary.
Morena, Nick, thank you for your presentation and report. It was most interesting. I just want to check 2 things with you. We often hear the narrative that businesses are leaving in droves, my words, which is not in fact supported by the data. The data shows growth, and I just want to check that with you. And the other one is in taking out the unique student population, the average income is equivalent to the national figures. Have I got that right? That's my first question.
Okay, on businesses, I mean, I guess like all sort of hyperbole, it's a little bit hard to kind of to fully understand what people are trying to represent with it. Certainly in terms of the number of businesses in Dunedin, we know that has risen. So there's a 1.1% growth in the number of businesses in Dunedin compared to 1.2% nationally. So it's absolutely true that there has been growth in businesses. And certainly if you look at employment as well, which is, I guess, a more tangible outcome, there was a little bit of a decrease, but broadly steady. It's possible that there's been some big businesses leave that I'm not aware of, but certainly the data doesn't show that kind of big effect. In terms of the household income estimate, so that was staff work. That is my understanding that you do get a little bit skewed by that large student population, which naturally has quite a low income. I don't have that exact figure. Maybe Anthony might in front of them.
Sure, and I'll come to that in a wee minute. And the other question I have is, what would you anticipate the impact of a general election, no matter what the result? What do you think the impact of that will be as we come into this period where we're getting closer to the what do you think will happen with the various figures? What's the norm in terms of cycles?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's I think by the time you bring in the various coalition permutations, it's going to be tight. In terms of the impact, I think we have seen a lot of signals out of Labor that they're not intending to rip up some of the reforms that National's put through. So I guess from that, I take my read is that I wouldn't expect a huge shift in activity. We're naturally going to have a bit of a pause in government kind of new government initiatives as we go into the election period, but I'm not expecting a great degree of change, sort of regardless of the way things go. Naturally, in politics, we do try to emphasise the differences, and so parties can kind of stand out against one another. But when you sort of zoom out, there's actually quite a lot of consistency. If we look at an area like migration policy, which is really important for the economy, being able to get the right skills in, if you look over a 10, 20-year period, you really see National and Labor essentially working, continuing the same direction of travel as each other. And so I think there is a degree of stability between parties.
Thank you, Nick. And could I ask Mr. Deaker to perhaps answer my question?
Thank you. Yes, we've gone to census data, and it shows that the 30 to 65-year cohort in population in Dunedin earns at the same average income as those around the country. And we're currently doing deeper work to look at median income by sectors and working on a series of personas around composition of household income in Dunedin. So we'll be able to bring that back to council soon for more detailed.
And Mr. Dicker, would it be correct that the student population, while they might skewer those income results, they bring other benefits to the city?
Yeah, I mean, that was our intention with the last graph showing the demographic breakdown of Dunedin. It really is an opportunity.
Can I just ask a question about the number of businesses? Is that registered businesses with the Companies Office? Is that how those are measured?
Yeah, so it's registered with in the Stats NZ business demography frame. So it's there's a slightly higher threshold than being, I guess, just registered at the Companies Office. There's a sort of an economic significance test. Mm-hmm. So, if you have just a company that owns one rental property, that's not going to be counted. But if it's a company which a one-person contracted business works through, then it would count. So, clearly you are going to have a lot of kind of self-employed people making up those numbers. So it's not as representative of overall outcomes as employment, but it's not skewed by holding companies, for example.
And I'm curious, when there's a bit of a recession and employment is challenging, do many more people start their own businesses?
I think so. I mean, I guess we have seen, certainly in the numbers this quarter, stronger business growth than job growth, and we have seen that throughout the recession. So again, there will be a little bit of economic significance of those businesses, but at the same time, you'd have to say, if employment is down in the city, people might be making these businesses, but they might be struggling at this point in time to get 40 hours a week out of those businesses.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Councillor Lund.
I've got some questions for Mr. Lee, and then some further ones which I'll do later. Just firstly, you said in your slide that there were 61,000 jobs in Dunedin, but I'm just looking online at Infometrics and in my own calculation of the page 79 table, and there were 67,000 jobs. So that's a fairly fundamental difference. Can you shed some light on that? Is that 61,000 full-time jobs, or is it equivalent? Is it part-time and full-time?
That one was for me, right?
Yeah, Mr. Brunsden, not Mr. Lee.
Mr. Lee, sorry, Mr. Brunsden. Yeah.
There are a few different ways of measuring jobs, and so when it comes to the quarterly monitor, we use a more timely measure, which is generally focused on people paid through PAYE, because they file monthly or more regularly with IRD, and so we get regular statistics that come through from that. There are more people that are employed that are paid in different ways. If you're self-employed, paid by drawings or something like that, IRD kind of only really gets to know about it at quarterly or at the end of the year, and so there will be slight differences in the level of employment between the regional profile, which is annual, and the quarterly, which is quarterly. What we do count is filled jobs, and so that could be 20 hours, that could be 40 hours, that could be 60 hours if you're having a bad time, and so that is not the same as full-time equivalents. And of course, noting that some people could have multiple part-time jobs and be counted in that.
Okay. The next thing, you mentioned that our GDP growth was 1.1% this year, but we had 4.1% inflation. So wouldn't it not be true that we've actually, we've gone backwards by 3% because our GDP hasn't increased by inflation? Isn't that true?
So that's on me. So when I talked about consumer spending, I did talk about the inflation impact because the consumer spending numbers are nominal; they're not adjusted for inflation. But the GDP figures that I talked about are real, so they are adjusted by inflation. So that is 1.1% GDP growth after inflation.
Right. And with the figures for the various industries, I'm particularly interested in construction, are they inflation adjusted or are they real figures?
So underneath that modelling, we do have real estimates for GDP in each industry. So I think in the commentary we talked about the situation for construction, and that was a real comment or sort of a real increase in activity. The figures that I showed in the slides, which was for jobs, that's also, I guess, effectively a real measure too.
I'm still not quite clear on that. For example, last year it said there were 696 million in revenue or turnover in construction in Dunedin, and it's at a level that it's been the worst it's been since the GFC. So, and what I want to know is if we are comparing actual 2010 figures with 2026 figures, or whether it's inflation adjusted.
Sorry, so you're talking about GDP for construction, or we're talking about consents?
Well,
here?
the value of construction I guess it will be consents. It was 696 million in your report. And so what I want to know is, because you've said there's nothing, we shouldn't be too concerned about construction. It had a net gain of 100 jobs, but the point is that my information from talking to the largest construction companies in Dunedin is that the income and the consents are down 20% this year, and it's been skewed by the hospital. And those jobs that have been created are for the hospital, which are largely out of town, not all of them. And the actual regular industry, that is your local subs and builders, they are struggling. That's the worst it's ever been since the GFC. That's my point. So I think, we need to have a couple of riders around the fact that you're saying we're actually growing construction. Construction has decreased dramatically for the local economy. Can we address that?
Yeah. So firstly, in terms of construction activity, if you let me jump back to March 2025, which is the last point we have kind of detailed industry level data. So that was our estimate was there was $696 million of GDP in construction in Dunedin in 2025. For GFC levels or post GFC kind of trough was around 397. So that's on a real basis. So that does show that overall construction volumes are sort of at least 50% larger now, or in 2025 than they were in 2012 post GFC. But totally to take your point, and certainly when we look at those the non-residential building consent numbers, you see a large spike when the hospital earlier stages of that were consented, and then consent volumes have fallen down substantially from there more recently. So we aren't able to kind of get into the weeds of exactly where the workers are coming from or whether they're fly in, fly out. The reality is that the construction work is happening in Dunedin, but clearly the fact that non-residential consents has come down essentially says to me that if you're not involved in the hospital construction, then I would certainly believe that construction volumes will be down quite a lot.
Yeah, thank you. And just a question around the visitor, the overseas visitor increase, which is great. It's a good news story. We've had 9.3, well now 5.5. You're saying to the June, and I'm assuming that that's because we are in the low season between March and June. So the actual, we can expect, if we are comparing March next year to March this year, would we be seeing a similar increase, like another 7 to 9% increase year on year for overseas visitors?
So that 5% increase in international guest nights was for the sort of the whole 12 months to June. So so the seasonality is not driving that.
Okay.
we
Why
would
is
hope
it so different then? Yeah, why is it gone from 9.3 to 5.5 in 3 months?
Yeah, so what we've seen is in terms of international visitor arrival, so I'll just switch to this because we have a slightly better view of that. We have seen quite a sharp pullback in arrivals out of North America and out of Europe, and Europe started falling essentially in April as soon as the Iran conflict came through. And so there has been quite a big shift, and the impact varies around the country. Some areas are doing better out of Australian and Chinese tourists that have kind of picked up the slack. Some areas that are more focused on North American and European visitors have knocked around. So, sort of to answer finally, I wouldn't expect that rate to continue. It is quite choppy in the international tourism space. We had some really good headwinds up to sort of February before the Iran conflict, but things are a little bit different now.
Yeah, I think you mean tailwinds. A question for Mr. Deaker. What do you put that increase in? Because it's fair to say we haven't had a lot of major events in the last year or two in Dunedin that might drive visitor accommodation. Is it simply that we know that Queenstown's experiencing record visitor numbers now? It's exceeded pre-COVID levels, and we know that it's at capacity. So are people, for example, choosing to drive or travel to Dunedin to get to Queenstown via Dunedin instead of Tekapo? Can you give us the 2 or 3 biggest reasons why we've had that increase, which would appear to be contrary to the fact that we've not had major events that might draw people here?
I think I'm going to have to come back to you on that one, Councillor. That's not my specialty area of understanding, I'm sorry. But thank you.
Councillor Treadwell and then Councillor Chambers.
Tēnā koe. Question for Mr. Brunsden. This is just regarding non-residential consents. I feel like that's kind of the most striking figure in the report, is the reduction comparative to the national average in non-residential consents. In the national overview section on page 36, you've noted that the public sector work has driven the overall increase in non-residential. Is the implication there that the city has benefited less from the public sector work proportional to the rest of the country?
At a point in time, and certainly, when we're talking about what's happened in just the past 12 months, you could say that Dunedin hasn't benefited to the same extent in terms of public sector consents for non-residential buildings. But clearly, if you look at the kind of charts that accompany it, you see there has been an enormous spike, sort of from 2021 through 2024. There has been some large public sector consenting influencing that spike. So to me, it's sort of a timing issue, and clearly overall workloads in Dunedin right now are heavily benefiting from public sector consenting in terms of the hospital, notwithstanding what we've noted around how that may or may not be spread around contractors in the city.
Awesome, thank you. That's really helpful context. Appreciate it.
Councillor Chambers.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a little bit bamboozled this morning in that I'm thinking of those graphs I've been looking at over the past few days. I know you've been presented with a whole lot of other graphs, which are slightly different. And in particular, I was going to ask you about vehicle registrations and car sales, because I know all the graphs that we're looking at in the reports that we've had for a few days, in the particular area of cars, it seems very volatile, what's been happening over the past few years, whereas every other graph is showing steady sort of improvements. So, but again, the figure this morning shows that your vehicles are up 88% or something nationally in these latest figures. So what are the trends in terms of car sales in the country, and how does Dunedin differ in terms of cars in general and electric vehicles in particular?
Yeah, so I guess firstly, cars at the national level, backing up a step further, we use cars as an indicator of household confidence. What people spend weekly through market card spending is probably a good indicator of what they're doing, but there's always going to be a baseline if you've got to spend a few $100 at the supermarket to live, to feed your family, whereas cars are a bit, we'd expect cars to pick up when times are better and households are more confident about making major investments. Cars have been on a pretty long downward slide ever since that sort of economic boom we had around 2022, 2023, and then sort of hastened by some of the changes around clean car standards. What we saw with the Iran conflict driving up fuel prices is it pushed up interest in purchasing cars. A large increase in EVs, nearly doubling in EV registrations in March, and there was also there was a bit of a lull through autumn and then a pick up again in June, which I think was people putting orders in for EVs in March and then getting them delivered off the boat perhaps in May or June. We have seen, EVs are still a minority of car registrations, but we're seeing petrol and hybrids are now kind of pretty much neck and neck nationally. So there has been, even though fuel prices have been rising, people have been shifting by and large to hybrid vehicles more so than electric, and that's how we've seen an increase in car registrations. The EV numbers are, I guess, relatively small compared to that, but certainly a large increase. Ultimately, what that says when you kind of compare it to the card spending is that there are a significant number of households in the community that are in a strong financial position and can make these investments in major purchases. But overall, spending is soft when you kind of average it out across the whole community.
Any other questions? Councillor Gaylor.
Hi, Nick. Just interested in the employment figures. Which would you say would be more important? Would it be the long-term nature of the people staying on the unemployment benefit, or rather the seeking jobs, or whether or not it would be the shorter-term figure? Which one is more important?
Sort of two separate kind of groups and two separate stories when I look at the short-term and long-term job seekers. So we use the data out of MSD, which defines it as less than 1 year or more than 1 year. And what we see is that the less than 1 year is highly responsive to what's going on in the job market. These are people that have generally lost a job and then are hanging around trying to find the next one. And obviously, if you've got a high unemployment environment, they're struggling to, it may take them a bit longer and they need to stay on job seeker support to get there. We have seen a fall in both groups, but generally what we expect is that the people that have been on job seeker for more than 1 year, obviously there's a lack of jobs, a lack of employment is part of the problem, but it is likely there's other things going on. We expect that group is not just going to run into employment as soon as job adverts pick up. And so we sort of view them differently. And I'd view the long-term job seekers as not being as representative of the overall labour market story, whereas the short term is much more, it's a bit like the unemployment rate reflects how things are going in the labour market. But encouraging that both groups ease.
So with these fresh figures, is there an actual figure on the long-term unemployed for Dunedin?
If you give me a little bit, I can get that for you, yes. So in the June quarter, just the quarter specifically, there were 1,500 job seekers in Dunedin that have been on the benefit for less than a year, and 2,100 that have been on for more than 1 year. So that is it's a city, so they're larger numbers, but that does, to me, that 2,100 does signify a group that is going to need some additional support to get back into the labour market, and I wouldn't necessarily expect that number to just fall on its own as the labour market improves.
So what you're saying is that number has actually risen, the long-term unemployed?
It's come down in the June quarter slightly from where it was in the June quarter last year.
Slightly, okay. And then the short-term unemployed, can we have any reasons for why that number is dropping? Could it be that people are just leaving Dunedin to look for work elsewhere?
Well, we did see an increase in employment in the June quarter. So, again, at 1.3%. So I think seeing a fall in short-term job seekers is broadly consistent with that. But I guess to be clear, in some of the figures we're talking about for the June year, so it's capturing the whole 12 months to June. Other figures, particularly in the commentary, might pick out where things are happening just in the 3 months of June. And really, we're in 2026, we are at a turning point. And so the last 3 months of the past 12 has been much better than the first 9 months, if that makes sense.
And just if you could, there's a lot of data here and a lot of information, but if you were to pick a top line, what would be the message that you would tell Dunedin people about what these figures actually show for Dunedin? Is it largely positive, or is it middling, or is it negative? What would you say?
Yeah, so I'd say overall, firstly, we're seeing that the national economy is recovering, but it is tentative and it's taking a wee while for that recovery to translate to better employment. For Dunedin specifically, we are seeing a better recovery than the national economy in some respects, but we are also seeing Dunedin not recovering at the same rate as its South Island peers across wider Otago, South and Canterbury.
So from your assessment, what would be our work-ons?
Well, I mean, to be fair, I wouldn't want to pin this on Dunedin too much because it is, to a very large extent, what's happening in the national economy. But I think I'd hope to see further growth in economic activity translating into employment over the coming quarters.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Mayhem.
Just following on from that, though, the job seeker support also counts people with health conditions or disability recipients. And we know that Dunedin has a higher number of people with disabilities than the rest of the nation. Do you think that is reflected in those unemployment statistics?
Yes, wouldn't have been how I would have designed a benefit system. With job seekers, people that have been have a doctor's certificate for a health condition or disability that's expected to last less than 1 year, they can be put on job seeker support, even if they've got a thing from the doctor saying that they can't work for the next 6 months. People that have essentially a permanent health condition or disability, an example of that would be being blind, they go on a different benefit. So if you have sort of structural differences, for example, IHC housing or things like that, that wouldn't be showing through in your job seeker numbers. If we look at what the figures are for Dunedin, so the two ways of slicing job seekers is work ready or health condition. It's 1,600 health condition and 2,000 work ready. So the majority of that is people in the work ready category. And sorry, finally, if you do have a kind of a structurally higher number of people in sort of health condition and disability group, would expect that to be fairly stable over time. So it wouldn't necessarily drive that percentage increases or decreases in your overall job seekers.
Thank you, Mr. Brunsden, Mr. Deaker and Mr. Costello for your enlightening answering to the questions, and thank you for the report. And I will move to note the update report on the Dunedin economy for the year to March 2026, seconded Councillor Gary. In moving this, there's always a lag in statistics, and the reality is actually what we see today in front of us. It was good to have the March snapshot, and now, of course, it was updated early this morning, I think, to the June quarter. The things that have changed since March, of course, have been the Middle East conflict, which has had a huge impact on fuel prices, car sales, and tourism as well, especially international tourism, which we've seen in the most recent tourism statistics, which have shown some big impacts in international visitors. We always need to be very careful when interpreting statistics. I really appreciate that Mr. Brunsden came on and gave us some background on some of those statistics, because we can all look at graphs and interpret them in very many different ways, but there are so many factors that impact on our economy, not even mentioning the national economy, of which we are a subset of that. We also know there's huge challenges around cost of living, which affect things like car sales, people going out to retail, and also, I guess, the challenges around having a national election coming in where people don't know what's going to happen. And I think that they certainly, the information that I have is that people are very, very careful about their spending leading up to an election. I think that this report paints a picture of a resilient economy, despite that challenging national economic environment. Our GDP growth was modest, but we do continue to benefit from those strong underlying fundamentals. Employment remains low, and we also need to be careful when we're interpreting those filled job statistics, is that we all know many people who have many jobs, including the student that lived at my house as well. So we do need to be careful around the interpretation of those, especially when we look at the filled jobs. The business numbers continue to grow, and you saw that I asked a question around are some people starting their own businesses, which does happen in an economic downturn, is that people might move off unemployment and actually start their own businesses. So that was a good question to have highlighted as well. I think in the report we also look at the importance of our health, our education sectors. They do provide stability and help underpin economic activity, and this is, I guess, the health sector, the education sector, the university, the polytech, etc. And while the report said it's great to have those as pillars, we also need to be very careful around when government policy changes and our challenges about being resilient to that and trying to build our economy to have a wider base. We see that manufacturing obviously has fallen in the last 10 years, but the professional services have gone up, and I think that's the smart city coming through there. We do see an ongoing recovery in tourism for New Zealand. Obviously, there are headwinds around capacity, around fuel, around how New Zealand markets itself as well. Councillor Lund brought up around events in his questions. However, I think that international tourism is not hugely impacted by events. It is impacted by the amount of marketing that Tourism New Zealand does for the entire country, and then the marketing that we do for our city as well. The challenges are always there. The commercial construction activity has declined. While we are very incredibly grateful for the hospital, it also impacts on how we read those figures about construction. I think we're expecting around over 700 people to come into the city at the start of next year to be working on that hospital inpatient building. So that will be an exciting boost for our city, but also put another bang in the statistics, which make it hard to interpret. I think part of what we do learn is when we go to business events and we actually talk to people that own businesses, and I am out there all the time talking to those people and seeing how they're doing business-wise as well. And we look at some of the statistics around people's willingness to move jobs, people's willingness to employ more people, and that gives us a sense of what actually is going on in the community. And a shout out here to Business South, who actually do a lot of those statistics and do measure the local community's confidence as well. So I think that Dunedin is well placed for the future. We obviously have to do a lot of work on our economic development strategy, about talking about what sort of things, talking and planning about what sort of things will make our city even more resilient. We've certainly got great opportunities in the health sector with the hospital build, and how we translate not just the building into an opportunity, but how we use it as a catalyst for our health sciences, for our university, for our training, and also to attract people to the hospital, to work at the hospital, those professionals to live here. So I guess that the house prices, that they were $200,000 lower on average than house prices throughout New Zealand, while the median 30-plus-year-olds were still earning the same, gives us a nice opportunity to sell us as a place with a great quality of living. Now, I will thank the staff and now move on if there's anyone else that wishes to speak around this noting report. Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie. There are some encouraging figures in this report, but for me the most interesting story sits behind the headline numbers. That story tells me our economy is performing considerably better than a simple comparison of headline yo-yo growth figures might suggest. Our strong education, health and public sectors provide an important anchor, while we've also seen significant growth in professional and technical services in other parts of our local economy also. There are warning signs, particularly around non-residential construction and recent employment figures, so there's certainly no room for complacency. But these figures also remind us that economic development isn't simply measured by how much council spends. Our role should be to provide good infrastructure, efficient and sensible regulation, and financial stability, creating the confidence for businesses to invest, expand, and create jobs. Council doesn't always have to drive the economy. Sometimes our most valuable contribution is making sure we don't get in its way. I'm happy to note this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gaylor.
I think there's some real positives in this report, and it's good to see that visitor nights have improved greatly, and that seems to correspond with the rest of New Zealand. However, the GDP growth is not strong, and I looked at the figure compared to Wellington. Of course, Wellington has taken a massive hit, but we're not that far behind, actually. And when you look at what we rely on for jobs, which is the education sector and the health sector, we are as exposed as Wellington to any government job cuts or changes in those areas. And then when you look at Invercargill, you see that their manufacturing sector is doing pretty well. They don't have these education, healthcare sectors to the extent that we have. So it's quite clear to me that we do need to boost our economic opportunities in Dunedin, that as a council we can foster that, and I'm very encouraged that we have hopefully a CCO on the way that will provide those fresh ideas and that encouragement and that focused support that I think the council does have a role to provide. But I just caution that the business numbers as well, while there has been a slight growth in business numbers, as our staff pointed out, that's not a given that is, large businesses or even medium-sized businesses. It could be people starting up consultancies because they don't have work. So we are very much beholden to our education healthcare sector. We're not going to have that continual surety while we are subject to the vagaries of government policy. So we need to develop some alternative ways to earn money as an economy and to improve the well-being of the city. And this report highlights that for me again. Over and over and over, we've seen this for Dunedin, these types of figures where we are very much reliant on that. And of course, the student population as well, we can't really rely on the student population because again, those numbers have been fluctuating also. And education is itself very much a moving feast as we have AI, we have various disruptors occurring within that industry, and because I believe we don't really have sufficient communication with the university, we don't really know what's going on until we see those figures hit the news year to year. So we're very much, I think, in a vulnerable situation. I feel for unemployed people. I think we need to watch those figures and circle those because we need to separate them out from the hospital build, because the rest of the economy, I don't believe, is looking in great shape. But there's plenty to work on. It's good to have the data, and I think that hopefully things will turn up for us next year.
Councillor Lund, then Councillor Gary.
Thanks, staff, for the report. But I do note that at page 73 there is what I consider there is a mistake. It says that Dunedin's economy is influenced by the university and the public sector. It's dominated. Our economy is dominated by the public sector, as Councillor Gaylor has just referred to. We have a public sector component of our economy of 29%. It's the same as Wellington. We are huge consumers of tax dollars. We are not producers of tax revenue, and the government knows that. And this report has sort of a tenor of quiet confidence that everything's going to be okay. I am not so sanguine about that. I'm not confident. I share Councillor Gaylor's concerns, and if we consider that Wellington, with all its government departments, with all the consulting businesses that are there to support those departments, and it has faced changes in government policy, and we are just as exposed to the possibility that there'll be a change in policy. And like Wellington, its house prices dropped 25% in the last 3 years. It lost 10,000 public sector jobs. It's about to lose another 6,000. The same could well happen to us. We are not in control of our own destiny when we rely on the public sector. And looking at the three biggest industries, at the healthcare, the long-term prognosis is that Central Otago is going to have a population of 300,000 people by 2070. It's going to surpass Dunedin's population in the next, I think, by 2045. And inevitably, there is going to be a regional hospital built there, and inevitably that will cause a reduction in funding, population-based per head funding in Dunedin Hospital, which will inevitably mean a reduction in scope and services. And as Councillor Gaylor has mentioned, in education, I'm not certain at all that the future generations of school leavers are going to want to spend up to $150,000 for a 3 or 4 year degree to come to Dunedin, when inevitably there's going to be online courses developed by AI for a fraction of the cost, courses run and have the imprimatur of global universities as well. And more specifically, I don't think we can rely on the University of Otago. For a number of years now, it's had major projects outside of Dunedin, and they now have a formal aim of vastly expanding their footprint and presence in Queenstown. And we only need to look at the case of our council subsidiary Aurora, where its CEO lives in Wanaka, and I can see a situation quite soon where potentially our senior management of the university may choose to focus on Queenstown, because that is where they see the growth. As I've said, construction, it's in my questions earlier, it's not a good story for the local industry. Yes, the hospital is a short-term sugar hit for the local economy over the next 3 or 4 years, but that is not going to affect or benefit the hundreds of local subcontractors, and the reality is that non-residential construction is down 20%, and my information is it's as bad as it's ever been. But turning to the bright spots, what can we do? I mean, the one sector that has increased in the employment tables is professional and technical scientific services, which is really good news. And also, of course, we need to focus on our visitor accommodation. This year, we had 4,500 overseas visitors arrive at Dunedin Airport. 20 years ago, we had 25,000. So the absolute priority is to have our ED unit, to sort out the future of our ED unit, which is in limbo at the moment, it appears, to work towards getting back what we had, which would turbocharge Dunedin's visitor economy. So, as I said, I am concerned about our long-term future, but there are some bright spots we can work on.
Councillor Gary.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I'm not going to talk about figures because that's been covered off very well, and I thank the Mayor for her overview of that. I'm going to talk about narrative. The narrative that we use to talk about our city affects people's impression of it. And I started to read this report thinking that it might be doom and gloom somewhat, and was pleasantly surprised at the positive trends. That's what we should be talking about, noting the areas that are of concern, but talking about the positive trends. Just yesterday, Distinction Hotel announced the refurbishment of a building and the establishment of another hotel. And that showed confidence in our city. I've just spent some time with some young Swedish entrepreneurs here on an exchange through the university, and it is always interesting to see ourselves through the eyes of others, and it was extremely positive, can I tell you. In fact, they said at the end of the presentation they did that they genuinely consider that Sweden, Norway, because it's a neighbouring country, and New Zealand were all prospective possible future homes for them. They're in the startup space and they spoke very positively. As to some of the comments around the international tourism, there is growth there, and we need to make sure we speak about our city positively and work on the things that attract and invest in the areas that attract our international tourists. We know that the student population skewers the trends somewhat, but there are benefits of having students here, and there's a figure which just isn't at my fingertips at the moment. I have a feeling it's 75,000 per international, yes, I see nods, international students each being worth to the city. But we look at our students from many different aspects besides the financial aspects. And we know that the university is looking to increase those international student numbers. In terms of the hospital, as people were talking about the way that's skewing the figures and looking at those non-residential consent figures, it brought to mind the number of hearings I've been on in the last 2 years around accommodation for our hospital workers, our hospital construction workers. So there are many parts to this. Obviously, we are impacted by geopolitical trends and events. However, there's an upside to that too, in that we are seen as a safe place. We're seen as a safe place for families to send their students to. That is the top reason. We're seen as a safe place to travel to, and so there is an upside to it. We're also impacted by national politics. I think the Mayor is right that we are a resilient city. We're also a unique city, and we have the building blocks to continue the growth and the positive trends that we have seen in this report. And I just hasten to add that the demographers say that our growth in the future will come from migration. And so I would urge all of my colleagues to take up the opportunity offered to us in terms of understanding our immigrants to our city, because that is where our growth is going to come from. My thanks to Mr. Brunsden for an excellent report, and to the staff for their work, particularly Mr. Lee, and to Mr. Deaker for presenting this morning. An excellent report.
Councillor Treadwell.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. The good thing about universities is that they're economically counter-cyclical. So in periods of high unemployment, more people enrol in training and education. And so in addition to the many benefits that they confer that aren't caught in the ledger, they're well recognised as a source of economic resilience. And if we consider the impacts of the recent fuel crisis on the economy, it's never been more clear that relying on the invisible hand of the market, that hardly puts you in control of your own destiny either, as a city. I'm glad to hear broad recognition that the figures from Infometrics are largely positive. Compared to the national average, in Dunedin, unemployment is lower, housing is more affordable, more people are buying their first home, school attendance is higher, the crime rate is lower, and domestic building consents are up. The report from Mr. Deaker and his team is especially significant, I think, in that it definitively busts some tired narratives about the city. There's a perception that pay in Dunedin is lower, and that's the trade-off you get for a better, more affordable lifestyle. But the report confirms something that I'd previously questioned around the table, which is if we control for our very high student population, what does that look like? And in fact, if you control for that, the median income is almost bang on the national average. So Dunedin is a better place to live than most of New Zealand. It's safer, it affords your kids a better education, and you probably don't need to take a pay cut to move here. I think this is a really important report, and that's a really important story about the city, and one that we need to be making clear to the rest of the country. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Sophie. As is often the case with papers for noting, I wasn't going to speak, but decided to, just based on some of the commentary. And I just wanted to talk about something that hasn't really been mentioned. That's the concept, of course, of livability. Firstly, just thanks to staff and Infometrics, really good information, very easy to read, and for the presentation today. And I do agree with Councillor Weatherall, actually, that we can't do everything. Of course we can't, but we do need to focus, and I think we all agree on infrastructure and get that right. And I definitely agree with Councillor Gary that getting the narrative right is really, really important. And related to that point, I think it was Tim Shadbolt, and sorry, I'm going to really destroy his very well-known quote. It was Tim Shadbolt who said in the early days of his mayoralty something along the lines of, if you talk your city down enough, it will become a basket case. It's not the exact quote, and I think his point is really pertinent. It's something we should always bear in mind when we're speaking. I'd have to remind you all that we're living in a very rapidly changing world, in a rapidly changing Aotearoa, in a rapidly changing city, actually, and we're going to be at the heart of that, and we are at the heart of that. And for me, a great city isn't just a place where people work and do business, it's a place where people genuinely want to live. It's part of the reason I'm here, actually. It's where you want to raise a family, it's where you want to study, and it's definitely where you want to invest and build a future. And as we were talking today, I did a few searches, and I got one from the World Economic Forum, and that identifies 6 key ingredients of a livable city. I mean, it's open to debate, of course: affordability, good amenities, connectivity, culture, safety, and sustainability. And the report we've got today speaks to many of those. And I think it's a pretty good way of looking at Dunedin, Ōtepoti Dunedin, actually. And I've said this many times over the years: if we want a thriving local economy, if we want to attract investment and encourage talented people to stay and make their lives here, we need to make sure our city is livable for everyone, and I mean everyone. Why? Because ultimately, livable cities are good for people and good for business. I think they're very much interrelated. They create stronger communities, they support local jobs, and through things like the university, they attract new ideas and help to build a sustainable future for everyone. So when we talk about investing in our city, we're not simply talking about infrastructure and economic growth, which are important. We are talking about creating a place where people genuinely want to live. They have a lot of choice. There's tens of millions of cities across the world, so they have lots of choice. So you want a place where people genuinely want to live and where they can thrive. And if we don't do that, I think we fail. So thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. This is genuinely a positive report. Over the past decade, our GDP per person has grown faster than the national average. Filled jobs have substantially outpaced population growth, and our unemployment rate remains below the national rate. To elaborate, over the past decade, the number of filled jobs in Dunedin has increased by 13%, while our population growth was 3%. A strong education and health sector gives Dunedin stability, skilled employment, and resilience. When we look beyond the headline figures, the city is performing considerably better than people assume. I'm very pleased to note this report and look forward to more upside going forward, and big thanks to the staff for the great work.
Thank you, everyone. Report for noting, so I will be quick about my right of reply so we can get on to the next report. Thank you, Councillor Weatherall, about the better economy and around the yo-yo figures, and especially around the noting the health and education as a key strength of the city. I did also note that you said the council doesn't have to drive the economy, that it's here to support it, and that is a very important fact. I think that has trickled through everyone's responses. When we talk about the confidence in the economy, tourism is choppy, and I think that people need to understand that it's incredibly seasonal. Last June, on those June figures, wasn't great, so we need to be super careful about where we target our visitors and where we invest in. Having said that, Councillor Gary brought up about the Distinction Hotel, 145 4.5-star rooms ready in the end of 2028. So I think that's an amazing amount of confidence in our economic future and in our tourism future as well, because hotels, this is about numbers as well. I know that it's also about love, because he loves, Mr Thompson loves the heritage buildings in there as well, but it certainly is a mark of confidence in the city. We certainly, we do work quite closely with the University of Otago. I meet them quarterly, I talk to them all the time, and they're busy refreshing their strategy. And in the past, perhaps we haven't talked as much to the university, and their growth aspirations have been quite large, and we need to make sure that we enable them also around the international student growth, which they are definitely targeting, and those are full fee paying people as well, which contributes hugely to our economy. There was a couple of mentions here about the Enterprise Dunedin review around the CCO there, and that will be coming very, very soon. There's been a team working on it, and it should go out to consultation soon. When we talk about the numbers that were coming through the airport, the Project Gateway invested $500,000 a year in the international, in targeting Australia for numbers. So that's something to think about when we think about the economic development budget. I also watched a video on the international students that was online last night, and that showed about how much international students are enjoying the city. And I also want to, Councillor Gary talked about the narrative and the positive trends, and I think that part of the narrative is not just what we say about our city, but what others say about our city, the international students, and including people like Mike Hosking, who was the parent of a student who graduated here last December and devoted an entire Mike's Minute to talking up the city, especially the work that had been done in George Street, the fact that he bought 3 paintings, and the experience that he had in the city. And the words that I took from what he said was, it is what every city in New Zealand should aspire to, and I think that's really important when we think about our long-term plan, about building our livability and making it a great place to live. So let's think about that. We also had the top quality of life in New Zealand in Dunedin in the latest survey. So we dig down beneath the statistics to actually how people perceive their life in our city, about how we attract people to live in this city. And I think, Councillor Treble, you did talk about the busting some myths around the once you control for the high student population, when we have around 25,000 students, that does skew it somewhat because they are living in different circumstances to the rest of us. And we do need to be careful about the story that we are telling about the city as well. So thank you, everyone. I think that Councillor, we just said not just infrastructure, creating a piece, creating a place where people genuinely want to live. And I think that some of the statistics that have come through in this report show that it is a good place to live, and we hope that we attract many more people. And it's not just about hope, it is about plans, and we will create a strategy together for better economic development. Right, I will now put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, that is carried. Now we'll move on to item 8, which is the Town Belt Active Trial Summary Report, and this report's around the feedback of the results of the Town Belt Active Travel Trial and outlined community feedback. And we have Scott McLean, General Manager City Services, Group Manager Parks and Recreation Heath Ellis, and Team Leader Transport Regulatory Simon Spears. Now, do you have any opening comments?
Thanks, Ms. Sophie. No, we'll take questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you. The report notes that pedestrian and cycling activity increased during the trial and then reduced after vehicle access was restored. Given this was a well-publicised trial, how confident are you that the reported increased usage was attributable primarily to the removal of vehicles rather than the publicity, novelty or organised activities that happened during the trial?
I might take that. Thanks, Councillor. Look, we can't be confident. As you say, it was publicised as a closed road and a place to go. So that will have undoubtedly led to increased cycling and walking and recreating on what would otherwise be an open road.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie, and thanks for the report. It's fairly definitive, well written and easy to understand. My main question is, of course we've done trials in the past and this is yet another one. Maybe for Mr. Spears, is there anything that came out of the trial that were particular learnings that if you did another trial around anything related to this that you would do again or wouldn't do again? Is there anything glaring?
We've learnt a lot through this. We've learnt a lot about how we use data. We'd probably do more data gathering before the trial. We'd probably look more at the environment and the use of the road. For us, this is not a particularly difficult trial to implement because it is just closing the road through the reshaping streets rule. But it was a really good opportunity for us to do something and to see what the impacts of changing the roading environment is. And that will lead us, make us better informed for decisions that get made through the long-term plan.
So sorry, from that, just to confirm. So if we did something like this in the future, you would probably recommend that we do some significant pre-trial stuff in terms of, so we have a base in terms of, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, we learn a lot through doing a trial, including how we can do them better in the future.
We've got Councillors Gaylor, Lund and Gary. Councillor Gaylor.
just on that question of the future, does this report, the way it's written and the way I read it, seems to leave the question open for the future, for some future closure of Queen's Drive? Am I right?
No, if you'll note one of the recommendations, Councillor, is that notes that following feedback from the trial, no further trials or changes to walking and cycling access are planned for the town belt. Of course, council at any time, if they're of a mind to change that, then they would be able to, but certainly staff have no intention. That we undertook the trial as requested by council, and this is reporting back on that.
So when you say no further closure is planned, then we would include that in future planning such as the 10-year plan?
Thank you, Councillor. So in the 9-year plan, there's $2 million in the transport budget for transport interventions to provide for safer walking and cycling from the hill suburbs. Obviously, long-term plans, and I don't want to state the obvious here, long-term plans are the opportunity for council to reconsider all of council's budgets. So that would be the time to do it, and if council were of a mind to retain that, increase it, decrease it or remove it, that would be entirely council's opportunity to do so.
Thank you. What is policy 8.10.1.12? Can you just describe to me what's referred to about that? It says that the trial was meant to inform that.
Thank you, Councillor. So the policy referred to there is from the Town Belt Management Plan, and that was around consideration of adapting Queen's Drive to enable resident-only access and establish the pedestrian cycleway route through the Town Belt, which was based off the feedback and submissions for the Town Belt Management Plan.
When you call it a policy, what sort of status does it have?
It was adopted through the management plan as part of the policies there.
So would it not be possible for us now to review that policy in light of the trial not having been successful?
Councillor, the reserve management plans are a statutory document. They take a lot of work to work through, so to amend that, you'd have to be rehashing the entire document. So it was provided for consideration, and that's what we've done. We've considered what that might look like. So in many ways, the trial was fulfilling that. Information gathered from it is of value. If we were to make, based entirely off that trial, if council wished to make changes and improvements to cycling and walking access, they would go, people value safer walking and cycling, but they also value driving. So you'd have to look at how you could accommodate safer walking and cycling and driving at the same time. So there's value in the results.
Yeah, is it fair to say, though, it's a fairly resounding mandate there from the results? We've had 1,500 in total, the majority of which were against the trial. Would we go through all of that process all over again to then reaffirm those results?
I don't necessarily think that's a question for staff, it's a question for council, which made the decision to vote for the trial.
Just one last question here. The trial apparently does not identify a single preferred future outcome for Queen's Drive, and yet when we voted on this, or when the council voted on this, I wasn't elected at that point, that was actually what we were looking into, and yet we've got a statement in here which says that wasn't the outcome of the trial. We don't actually have a clear statement in our recommendations for this paper that you've put in that says that this is not something that people want. This is no closure to vehicles should ever take place here. Why have we not been so definitive on that point when we were quite definitive on it when we voted on it?
Thanks, Councillor. You were definitive on wanting to undertake a trial to inform any potential future changes. So council, appreciate you weren't around the table at the time, council didn't vote to permanently close the road or come up with a preferred option council wanted to undertake a trial to inform any future decision on changes to walking and cycling and vehicle access. So no, that's not quite correct.
With respect, there are some different wording on the council's website which suggests that in fact it was more definitive than that. So yeah, it does feel as though the narrative has changed a little bit here.
Okay, I think that that's a question for councillors who made the decisions. Can I just jump in about a question for there was some feedback around requests for school safer access you brought up around the funding for low cost improvements. But there was in the data that came back, there were some schools that talked about safer access, and will that be some that might be possibly actioned with the funding?
So the low risk budget's only $1 million per year, and that's already going to be allocated for the next 3 to 4 years. We're just working through that program, predominantly around supporting schools. But the money that's in the long-term plan for the town belt could be used for, if it stays in the long-term plan, could be used for improving access for schools by improving footpaths, etc.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lund.
Just following on, Mr. McLean, from what you've just noted, that in paragraph 5D that there's no further, trials or closures planned. I'm a little concerned at page 94. There seems to be something that contradicts that, because it says that the trial findings do not identify preferred future access arrangements for Queen's Drive, when in fact they do. So that's my first question.
That sounded more like a statement. I didn't pick up a question. Sorry, councillor.
Well, you've said that the council is not planning to make any changes to Queen's Drive, and yet the staff in their report are saying, no, this doesn't actually determine the future access arrangements to Queen's Drive. That's completely at odds with what paragraph 5D says.
I think that will be a decision for council in the future. Everything is open for consultation. This was a trial.
Well, I don't accept that, but I'll move on. Regarding engagement, there's a list of stakeholder engagement that the council, but is that complete? Is that a complete list?
Thank you, Councillor. You're referring to the table of on pages 89 and 100?
Yes. I haven't got the page, but yes, it lists about 7 or 8 groups.
It's exhaustive of the groups that the staff met with. It's not potentially people that rung up and requested to speak wouldn't be listed there, but that's the ones that were actively went out and spoke to.
I'm a little puzzled at that, because on February the 26th, it's recorded that DCC staff with Spokes Dunedin organised an advocacy day to run through and explain the town belt trial. So why are they not listed? And why was the AA, the biggest group in Dunedin that would be affected with thousands of members, why was it considered that they would not be consulted with? So 2 questions.
Thank you, Councillor. So the Spokes, was it separate to the breakfast event on the 18th of February that's listed?
It says in the report that engagement was taken between January and April, so that falls within the consultation period.
Sorry, Councillor, the Spokes one is called out on the table?
Right, okay. No, that's fine, I'll take that back. Regarding the AA, can you explain why they were not consulted?
Thanks, Councillor. I understand they made a submission, but I can't explain why there wasn't a specific meeting set up with them from staff.
You'd agree that they'd be the largest affected group, though, bigger than, for example, many of the others that we engaged with.
They're definitely a large group. Yep, I agree with that.
If I may, I think Mr. Spears in an earlier answer said there's a lot we've learned, so we'll take that as something that we've learned. It's a valid point.
Could we also take as a learning to be more specific? At paragraph 33, it says to summarise the trial, it said that the community feedback demonstrated a range of views regarding access. So wouldn't it be more accurate to say...
Councillor Lunn, just for a moment, you talk about paragraph 33, but on paragraph 33 I've got community feedback demonstrated a range of views regarding future access arrangements. So what page are you on and what paragraph?
I'm on page 85.
Paragraph 33, is mine different?
Yes, it must be, because I'm looking at it here.
So, sorry.
Page 85?
Yeah.
Yep, paragraph 33.
Yeah, I've got community feedback demonstrated a range of views regarding future access arrangements. Is that what you're reading, or is
that's correct? And wouldn't it be more accurate to say that a very clear majority categorically opposed the views, rather than just say there was a range of views? That's not really accurate.
No, I don't think staff should answer that, because that is.
Well, it's a statement of fact that 60%.
But that is covered in the report. The views are covered in the report. That statement is correct, that there are a range of views, and later in the report, or somewhere in the report, it does talk about the range of views, both online and consulted with. Now, Councillor Gary, you have questions?
Thank you, Your Worship. Tēnā koutou, gentlemen. I just wanted to check in with you, Mr. Spears, as my first question. The trial aspect is something that's not new, but I can remember a time when we weren't able to do trials. We just had to do the thing from a transport perspective. Now we're able to, because the legislation changes, to trial things. This is exactly what we used, wasn't it? To see how it worked. That was the whole purpose.
Yeah, so through the reshaping streets legislation, that allows us to conduct trials, to do alternative things on the street to inform future decisions on what we may do. So we're not bound to do any changes.
Second of three questions is, this was conducted prior to the Iran conflict, and I raised that because people's behaviour changed, people's view of, I think, of car use changed in that period. How did the overlap happen, and do you think the trial, maybe that's not a question for you, but is it possible that the impact of that geopolitical event may have impacted the trial differently?
I don't know, to be honest. We'd have to think about it, but it's not something I've considered, so I can't really comment, I'm afraid.
Fair enough. And third question is, could you expand on the feedback from the disability community? Because my impression is that there were some real pluses for the disability community in this trial.
I haven't looked at the specific feedback. I've had a number of conversations, and there were a range of opinions expressed. There were some people that who were disabled who felt that the road closure inhibited their access to the town belt. There were other people that felt that the town belt closure gave them a place where they could be safe and be more active on the town belt area. So there were a range of opinions, and that was one of the learnings too, where we went up with Mr. Marable and looked at how we might look at this and do it better in the future.
So it will probably depend on the disability too. Yep. Thank you for that.
Councillor Hall and Councillor Gaylor.
Just to talk about the technology a little bit, how did the new cameras go recording the usage and identifying between pedestrians, cyclists and vehicles? Do you think this is a new tool in our toolbox going forward for other things?
This type of tool is really good. It gave us a lot of information about classifications of vehicles, types of vehicles, people moving through, cyclists. So it's definitely a very valuable tool. Whether it would be the specific tool we'd use more in the future, we're looking at other tools. But it definitely helps because it gives us more granular data, and that's always a good thing.
Did you have a follow-up? No. Councillor Gaylor.
Just on the origins of the trial in the first place, are you aware of a view that there was not a lot of public demand for this trial in the first place?
I'll take that one, Councillor. So Mr. Ellis has referred to the Town Belt Management Plan. So that came out of public consultation. They wanted the public wanted us to explore different access arrangements. Council, second fold to that, also put money in the 9-year plan to improve walking and cycling access in the town belt. So staff felt it was a trial might be a good way to understand the values. So they put it to council and asked council, would you like a trial undertaken? And council said, yes, please. So, and this is the results of that. So we didn't go out to the public before we came to you. We didn't go out and say, do you want us to undertake a trial? That had already come through in the public consultation and the reserve management plan process.
Are you aware of the former chair of that particular committee, Andrew Wiley's view, which was given publicly during the by-election campaign, that he was completely blindsided and surprised that a trial came out of that particular review?
I don't think that's a question.
Are you aware of
just
his...
a moment. Don't just. That's not a question. Don't interrupt me. Don't interrupt me. Okay.
Point of order. Disrespect. 25.2.
That's against disrespect. Councillor Walker, you'll have to adjudicate on this. Would you like me to call an adjournment? Yeah, please. I'll adjourn for 2 minutes. All those seconded. Councillor Mayhew, all those in favour?
Quiet, thank you. Councillor Treadwell, thank you. Okay, on the point of order, 25.2b, disrespect. Just to make it clear, I wanted to clarify with the person calling the point of order, that's 25.2b, which I've done, disrespect. I'm going to uphold the point of order. And Councillor Gaylor, please, when the Mayor asks you to stop talking, can you please respect that request? Thank you. Let's move on.
Thank you. One other question. I did ask prior to this meeting what the number is in terms of the amount of staff time that has been used on this project and the cost of the project. We have $15,000 is the budget, and I understand it came in slightly under that. But what was the cumulative amount of staff time? Can you give me an idea of the amount of time spent by the transport team on this task?
Yep, specifically the transport team, there was it goes back to last calendar year, there's been a little over a week of an FTE, so 46 hours from the transport team.
And from marketing communications?
I don't have the marketing communicator, it would be relatively small. Probably the bulk of the hours fell in the parks team. They had to obviously assess and upload all of the submissions. They responded to a large number of online queries, phone calls, etc. So the bulk of their time came in, but we don't do time sheets as such. So calculating the cost, like we were carrying out council's request, and obviously that comes at a cost of staff time. Every time you ask us to do something, it essentially costs money, but that's not.
Thank you. So when you say parks, the bulk of the time came in from the parks team, what was that figure?
That's challenging to assess because we don't sit there and do timesheets. Phone calls get put through from CSA saying someone would like to talk to you about the Town Belt trial. That could be a 5-minute phone call, it could be a half an hour phone call, but the staff members don't sit there and log their time in a timesheet system, so I'm not able to give you an accurate answer.
I'm aware that in other areas of local government there are project codes that can be, you can then determine the amount of time that was spent on something. Do you not have those either?
For capital projects we do, but different to, in former life, at the regional council they had targeted rates, they had rating districts that paid for things, and you had to allocate your time either to an overhead or to a rating district. We don't do that. The park staff are primarily funded out of general rates, so no.
It wasn't just note that it wasn't particularly onerous to do that. Could it be something that could be actually
well, I think that you're making a commentary about it not being particularly onerous. I think that's quite judgmental. I just want to remind councillors that staff are there as experts to provide answers on the paper. They're not there around political commentary, and it's and I'd be careful about the language that's being used to staff who are here to do a job and are respected experts. Thank you. Councillor Mayhem.
Kia ora, gentlemen. I wondered, this is probably a question for Ms Benson, who's no longer with us, but maybe someone in the transport team can tell me. It's a lot more expensive to maintain a road than it is to close a road. Would that be true? So do we have any stats on how much per kilometre road maintenance in general costs us as a council?
It's complicated because it depends on how the road's built, how it's used. Low volume roads last a lot longer. I think in terms of planning infrastructure for roads, obviously the cheapest things are things like closures or to do nothing and retain the status quo, and then where you're building infrastructure, that's where you're adding more cost, obviously, and more maintenance cost longer term.
Oh, yeah.
Also, with the staff time, I don't think that would cover the coordination of the 3 cleanups that took place with volunteer labour. I know that there were park staff in attendance, but that was Keep Dunedin Beautiful and activation of a couple of Dunedin business groups, Oratane Global, that attended the cleanup. So that's not counted in the park team's hours, is it?
It ultimately would be if it was during work time. It would be, yes, yep. But we don't have an accurate figure because there was a lot going on for that staff member in terms of responding mainly to feedback and inquiries.
I think one of those was on the weekend, so I doubt that those staff were employed. They were just volunteering their time in those clean-ups on the weekend, definitely.
Question. Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Fiso has said that she will move this and I will second it. Would you like to speak to it?
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I just want to say a big ka mihi nui kia koutou to the staff. Again, for following our resolutions, for delivering the mahi, for doing the engagement, and for the report. And this is a report only for noting, so I don't expect to make a big speech. But for the benefit of the people who haven't read the papers, I just like to say, from the attachment A, the actual report of the trial. The trial was undertaken in the context of Policy 8.10.1.12 of the Dunedin Town Bound Reserve Management Plan, which states that Council shall consider the adaptation of Queen's Drive to enable resident-only access and establish a pedestrian and cycleway route through the length of the town belt, while striving to achieve promotion of transport safety, promotion of non-vehicular transport modes, reduction of illegal car parking, reduction in the ability to illegally dump rubbish, and the promotion of zero carbon outcomes. And just another little snippet from the report, which people would have appreciated if they'd read them. As the trial was temporary in nature, the monitoring program provides a snapshot of transport behaviour during the assessment period rather than a comprehensive long-term transport model. Findings should therefore be interpreted as indicative of observed trends and operational outcomes during the trial period. Just want to make a comment, just highlight from the report under something about transport monitoring methodology. 3.3.1 Scenic Drive Function Traffic Monitoring undertaken during the trial provides information about the timing and the volume of vehicle movement along Queen's Drive. As shown as in Figure 9, the highest volumes of vehicle movement generally occurred during weekday peak periods, particularly between approximately 8 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 5 p.m. Traffic volumes were generally lower outside these periods, including during the middle of the day and later in the evening. Another snippet: following reintroduction of vehicle access at the conclusion of the trial, pedestrian and cycling activity reduced compared with levels observed during the closure period. Despite general favourable weather conditions, while a range of factors may influence corridor use, the observed change indicates a relationship between vehicle access and the way some people use the corridor for access. And I just want to cite from the conclusion: the trial was not intended to represent a final design outcome for Queen's Drive or the wider town belt. Rather, it was undertaken to provide information about how the corridor functioned under temporary changes to vehicle access and to identify opportunities, constraints and community priorities that may be relevant to future planning. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Gaylor. Okay, so I'm absolutely stoked that the historic Queen's Drive isn't going to be closed to vehicles in favour of cyclists. The majority of the thousands of comments we can see from a wide variety of people told the council they do not want this. In fact, I don't believe the grounds to hold the trial itself were ever there. We did not need to spend nearly $15,000 promoting something that there was next to no public demand for in the first place. Former councillor Andrew Wiley confirmed this indelibly. He was chair of the planning committee which considered a town belt review in 2025, and he said publicly at a by-election event he was very surprised to see a trial emerge from those hearings and that...
Sorry, I can't. I was 25-2 D misrepresentation. I can't sit here and listen to this. You cannot say that this trial does not have authority. It sits clearly within the town management. I sat on that committee. Did you as well, Brent? Somebody else here, Marie. So you cannot say that. That is a misrepresentation of the truth.
Thank you. I'll just take a short adjournment. I move that we adjourn for 2 minutes. Second to Councillor Gary. All those in favour say aye. Against, that is carried.
Studied the submissions to the earlier process. Remember, this was justification for the trial. I found that possible removal of vehicles from the town belt corridor had only been a suggestion that staff had made, and only a few submissions from cycle lobby groups or those connected to them mentioned it. A good number, such as the Dunedin Amenity Society, were opposed to any such idea and were much more concerned, as we should all be, about the maintenance of the parks and reserves within the town belt. So the question remains, who really wanted this trial? If it wasn't demanded at a hearing or by submissions, then why did we do it? The public feedback demonstrates they too are cynical. I quote from the report. A recurring theme across social media discussions was the level of trust in council decision-making processes. Some commentators expressed concern that the trial outcome had been predetermined or that temporary changes could become permanent regardless of feedback received. I will take the liberty of speaking for the people now, echoing what they have told us over and over again. It happened with Albany Street and all the cycleways we see in the city, that there is a concerted campaign under the radar within this council to remove cars from our roads and free up those same roads.
Point of order, Your Worship.
What? Thank you. I'll take an adjournment. I move that we have an adjournment for 2 minutes. Seconded Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Thank you. Order and remind the councillor to be careful around the representation of council policy.
I will continue to exercise my right of free speech, which is, I don't believe, is offensive. No, I'm just carrying on. I'm wanting to carry on.
Well, you actually, I think, being
It's not disrespectful. I'm just carrying on.
No, it's my judgment or someone else's judgment about whether it's disrespectful. I appreciate that you have a particular viewpoint, but I'm reminding you to be careful about what you say about council policy.
So it's very much a relief to see that when people get up in numbers, the system works as a backstop to this level of what I reluctantly describe, and this is only my opinion, but it is the perception of many others also who have publicly aired this view, can only be fairly and accurately described as a form of manipulation. I'll go on to prove this in a second. The hard no from the community came in spite of the lobbying, freebies, events and hard-out advertising paid for by them as ratepayers that was done to try and convince them, those same ratepayers, not to just comment on the trial, but to like the trial. The devil, however, is in the detail in this report. This report clearly, in my mind, shows the seeds for a revival of this issue like some ghastly zombie apparition that refuses to die will occur again. The report reframes the narrative of the entire trial as an information and evidence-seeking exercise only, and I quote, claims not to be seeking a single preferred outcome. But I quote from the report, any future changes will remain subject to further council consideration. That indicates to me that there may be future changes put to this council still, and yet we have had an overriding mandate to cease any such work. Seeking an outcome was what this councillors were told when they narrowly voted for it back at the start of the year. And that was what the trial was meant to be about.
I'm just going to call a point of order because misrepresentation. The councillors voted 10-4 to carry this trial out, so I will say that that is 25.2.d misrepresentation.
I apologise, withdrawal.
It's got to be ruled on.
Councillor Gay, are you happy to withdraw that previous comment, please?
I withdraw. What we now have today, though, is something quite different. One has to ask, how can this council's elected body have any faith in reports put in front of it when the story and original grounds for the vote changes as this one has?
Misrepresentation. I'm going to go disrespect towards language, actually. 25.2.b, language about disrespectful behaviour, disrespectful language towards staff in their report. Staff are officers of council who are delivering reports as requested by council.
I will withdraw.
We adjourn. We'll just have a ruling on it. I move that we adjourn for 2 minutes. Seconded, Councillor Gary.
I'll bring us back to order. Councillor Gaylor, I'm going to rule on the point of order. I assume you're prepared to withdraw it, is that right? But can I just remind you before we move on, you are sailing pretty close to the wind here. You have a number of times. It'd be nice if we could move the meeting on. Your points have been made very clear, so just take those on board and please withdraw the previous comment.
I do withdraw that. But I just want to add that for once, this was a victory of people not normally connected to each other over a very powerful and well-organised Dunedin community of cyclists and carbon zero activists. They're also well connected into this council. I truly hope that this issue of possible closure of Queen's Drive will not return in any shape or form. We've spent enough money, staff time and political energy dealing with this issue. Just imagine what we could have achieved if all of this energy was put into South Dunedin and Mosgiel infrastructure. If we spent equivalent amounts of introspection, consideration, time, money, planning, promotion to come up with a satisfactory solution for South Dunedin's much more urgent needs. Thank you.
Councillor Lund.
I'm one of just two councillors here today that voted against the trial because I felt it was against the public interest. At the time in December, I'd said in my speech that I'd run the length of Queen's Drive hundreds of times over many years. I didn't feel there was a safety issue, and the public has agreed. I think we've got a very clear majority view that the public does not want changes. And that was despite, as Councillor Gaylor has mentioned, that it is, in my view anyway, the stakeholder engagement was skewed towards the cycle groups and the pro-closure groups. But despite this, we have a very clear preference. And yeah, as I've raised earlier, the AA was not consulted, which I think was a significant shortcoming. One group I would like to mention is the Dunedin Amenities Society, because they are fiercely protective of the town belt, and they have been for over 100 years. And so they organise working bees to clean up rubbish. They are completely passionate about the town belt, and they did not support the closure. They did not think it was in the best interest of the city. Around safety, it's notable that page 93 that it says that the number of crashes within the town belt remain relatively low, which would mean that if Transit were funding this, for example, they wouldn't, because the data would not support it. I do have concerns, as Councillor Gaylor has noted, around the potential to revisit this, but we'll accept Mr McLean and staff's that there's no further action, because the public had been clear, and it would be a breach of public trust to attempt to revisit this, in my view. And the level of trust in residents with council is an issue, and I thank the staff for being candid about this in the report. And by leaving the town belt alone, we can go some small way to restoring some trust in us.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Ms Sophie, and thanks of course to staff, particularly for running a trial on such a tight budget actually, and and just for the feedback report. I want to start with the two most important points. This was a trial, and it was a trial that was voted for by councillors, a vote of 10-4, as you can read in your papers. It wasn't voted for by staff. And for completeness, it was spat out of the Town Belt Management Plan. I was on that, and that aspect of the plan has now been ticked off, so that's great, complete with learnings, so well done. And I think it's worth emphasising the word trial, and I do it a few times, because trials are something that councils absolutely should be comfortable with doing. We don't always have to get everything perfect at the first attempt. That's where council is made up of humans, and sometimes the best way, of course, to find out whether something works is simply to give it a go, see what happens, listen to the people, gather the evidence, and then make better informed decisions. That seems like a sensible way to go, and that's exactly, in my mind, what we did with the Town Belt Travel Initiative. So rather than debating what might happen, we had the opportunity to see what actually happened here in Ōtepoti, up in our town belt. So what did we learn? And I'm sorry, I'm just going to repeat some of the report here. Firstly, people changed the way they used the corridor. When vehicle access was reduced, we saw more people walking and cycling. And I'll just add an important point there. It's walking and cycling. This is not about just cycling. In fact, the majority of people in there were walking. When normal access returned, that activity reduced again. That gives us some useful real-world information, how the way we design our streets can influence how people move around our city. Valuable information. Secondly, the trial highlighted some things we need to think carefully about. Hence my question. There are some physical constraints along this particular route, places where pedestrian separation is limited, and locations where vehicle speeds were higher than they should have been. That's not abnormal, I think. If we ever do look to change in the future, those issues, and that's anywhere around the city, those issues will need to be properly addressed. Again, I was asking about learnings. We also looked at environmental and amenity impacts during the trial. Community cleanups recorded fewer items dumped during the trial, although the data isn't strong enough to say that the trial caused that, and I think that's a fair assumption. And our biodiversity observations were way too limited to draw firm conclusions. If we want to understand those impacts properly, we need longer-term seasonal monitoring. And it was encouraging to hear Mr. Spear saying in the future we probably front-end it by collecting data, and I think that would just be a very sensible way to go. But the most important part of the whole exercise was listening to the community. As I'm sure you're all aware, and Councillor Gaylor has pointed that out, we received more than 1,500 submissions. That's great. Majority were opposed to permanently closing Queen's Drive to vehicles, and I certainly acknowledge and respect that. I always have done. I've always been a fan of getting feedback from the community and then analysing it, listening to it, and ascertaining where I'd go after that. But at the same time, there were many people who really valued the quieter environment and wanted us to explore better walking and cycling options in the area. That's also worth noting. Ultimately, that's what democracy looks like. Sometimes our communities have genuinely different views, and our job isn't to pretend they don't. Our job is to listen, understand these different perspectives, look at the evidence and find the best way forward. So where does that leave us now? Well, the trial is finished, vehicle access has been restored, and there are currently no further trials or changes to access in the Town Belt Plan. It's very clear. The trial was never intended to predetermine what council would eventually decide. It was about gathering information that could sit alongside the Town Belt Reserve Management Plan and our normal planning and funding processes. Again, tick in the box. Furthermore, when future proposals for walking, wheeling or safety improvements come forward, they'll need to be considered on their merits, with proper technical work, funding considerations, and importantly, further engagement with the community. And I've always thought that's a sensible approach, because the real value of a trial is it gives us something far better than argument based on assumptions. It gives us experience, it gives us evidence, and it gives us opportunity to learn. And I'm running out here, so I'm going to have to run to the end of my my notes here. I just think ultimately it's how we make better decisions for Ōtepoti, and to me that's us doing our job, and it's simply good governance. Thank you.
Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie. Well, I was and still am happy I supported undertaking this trial because I believe in appropriate council process to test an idea, gather evidence, enabling us to listen to the residents and the community before making any longer term decisions. The trial has provided some interesting findings, with 50% more people wanting Queen's Drive to remain open to vehicles than those that support its closure to vehicles. There are other findings worth acknowledging also. Walking and cycling activity increased during the trial, and the surrounding transport network appears to have coped with the changed traffic movements. Yet, there is no doubt the majority view expressed through the consultation was to retain vehicle access. For me, there is an important difference between supporting better walking and cycling opportunities through our town belt than assuming that vehicles must be removed to achieve them. The town belt is a magnificent public asset, and I certainly support looking at ways of enabling more people to safely walk, cycle and enjoy it. But if we undertake consultation, we also have to have a responsibility to listen to what people tell us. So for today, I'm happy to note the findings of the trial and allow that evidence to inform whatever discussions council may have in the future regarding the town belt. Thank you to staff. Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Ms. Sophie. This was a trial. It was approved as a trial, it was run as a trial, and it is intended to gather real evidence and public feedback before any permanent decisions was made. I take umbrage at an attempt to portray it as something it is not. Nothing was predetermined. We tested an idea, we listened to the community, and now we have an outcome. The majority opposed permanent closure, and no further changes are planned. This is exactly what responsible trial is supposed to achieve. Inform councillors of information it needs to make a decision. Personally, I think spending $14,000 to test an idea before potentially spending part of a $2 million is responsible decision making. We tested it, we listened to the community, and now we know the outcome. A trial that tells you not to proceed isn't a failed trial. It's a trial doing its job. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to go over the very salient points made around the table about the trial, but what I do want to do is talk about context. I've been around long enough to remember a time when we were not able to do trials in terms of the transport corridor. And so you had to make a decision on what you thought was going to happen without being able to test it. And so when that particular legislation came in, it was a positive that you could try something, test it before investing a considerable amount of money in it. Also, in trialling it, you could learn various things that applied to other parts of our work, and this is certainly the case in this particular trial. For councillors who are newer to the table, the management plan process, and some of my colleagues have been on those hearing panels, and it, I'm sure, was a learning experience for all of us as we went through all of those management plans and came through a very thorough consultation process of submissions, hearings, and then we landed on a draft. Went out with the draft that council approved, and then we landed on the final document. It was a long process, and I see Mr. Ellis nodding. It was a very long process, but it was worthwhile and particularly thorough. I chaired one of those management plan, not the town belt one, but another one, and I was on another of the committee's hearing panels. So that's the context. In terms of how we decided to go for trial. And the trial, as I said, gives us a chance to test the ideas. And as Councillor Walker has very well outlined, there were lots of learnings. And I see in the report we can use those learnings in other areas of Council's work in terms of the Utaputi Pathways work, and I'm sure there will be other areas as well. It would have been interesting to have seen what happened, and we won't know, but if this trial had taken place directly after the Iran conflict broke out, because there was a difference in the public's perception of vehicle movements and the use of cars at that time, a behaviour change driven by cost. And I want to just push back on any idea of the word manipulation was used, and I find that outrageous because we, on one hand, are held to account.
I would like to call a point of order on that disrespect, because I wasn't able to speak about it.
Sorry, what's the number of your point of order?
The number that you used earlier.
Are you, sorry, can you...
20, that's correct.
25.2 point B, language disrespectful. Could you just, sorry, I missed what you were saying, Councillor Gary.
I noted the use of the word manipulation and said that I found it outrageous.
Okay. Thank you. So, no, we just don't...
I called a point of order.
Called a point of order, yeah.
And it's because...
No, just one moment. I did... Just don't... No. Can you just stop talking over me? Because what I was about to say was that I did not hear what she was saying, and I was asking to repeat it so that I could rule on the point of order. I will just call an adjournment, seconded Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we're often taken to task about our level of engagement with the community, and there were many opportunities taken to engage with the community, and I compliment staff for that. And in terms of predetermined outcome, which has been something that's been referred to in many of the debate speeches, that is not how we roll. Sometimes we have to, as a council process, provide a preferred outcome. That is not the case in this particular example, but there was no predetermined outcome. The trial was to find out how the community responded and how it worked and learn from it, and we have done that. And we will move forward. And I go back to Councillor Weatherall's comments about solid council process. That is what we followed here. Thank you to the staff for the considerable mahi, and I suggest possibly abuse that they experienced during this time. Your work is thorough, and you've carried it out diligently according to council's resolutions.
Councillor Treadwell.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I loved this whole thing, basically, apart from a little bit, which I'll get back to later. I liked the trial itself. I enjoyed the activation events. I liked fronting up and talking to people, some of whom were into it, and actually especially the people who, were against it or had views against it. This might not be intuitive in the moment, but if, for weeks, the biggest story in town is furor over a temporary road closure, things probably going okay in the city, broadly. I also quite enjoy the image of some kind of lycra conspiracy, which I enjoy. If you tasked me with getting a whole lot of people really passionate about civic amenities and active travel, I don't think I could have done anything nearly as successful. I also think it's inarguable that this succeeded as a data gathering exercise. It gave us a better idea of the traffic movements in the area. It demonstrated an uptick in the walking and cycling under these conditions. And it would seem to indicate that the rubbish being dumped is largely a function of fly tipping, which I think is an important, outcome. It's been claimed that there was next to no public demand for this, which I think is demonstrably false when a full third of submissions wanted it permanently closed to cars. Though, of course, the majority did not, and I respect that. Again, this was a trial, and we have to respect the results thereof. The trial, it did also succeed in most of the goals of the Dunedin Town Belt Reserve Management Plan policy, in that it measurably increased active travel, reduced illegal dumping of rubbish, and thereby contributed to our zero carbon goals. The one part that I didn't like, that I mentioned earlier, was just some of the really vicious online attacks against our staff, of which I saw a fair few. Regardless of what you think of a council process, that kind of behaviour is out of order. And if you do have a strong urge to go online and call people names, come for me, come for us, because we've put our hands up for it. Don't you dare come for the staff, who are good, hard-working people just carrying out the job that we ask them to do. So basically, I'd like to give thanks to staff, especially given the high level of public scrutiny on this one, for a successful trial and a fulsome report, which I am happy to note. Ka mihi.
Councillor Mayhem.
Thank you, and thank you for your words, Councillor Treadwell. I agree wholeheartedly that the staff had absolutely no reason to be on the receiving end of some of the abuse that they experienced. I just want to talk about the data and the rubbish collection, because fly tipping has always been a problem on the town belt. As the chair of Keep Dunedin Beautiful, we regularly do clean-ups, usually around Prospect Park, because it has a very secluded area that people find it very easy to throw couches and televisions out of their car and down the bank. Although during this trial clean-up we didn't focus on Prospect Park, we started at the Moana Pool car park actually. I just want to, even though the data wasn't conclusive, I just want to explain a little bit how the clean-ups happened. So 5 people collected 20 bags of rubbish in September last year, prior to the trial commencing. During the trial period, we did a broad clean-up of all of the town belt with a group called Oratane Global, and I was situated in the Moana Pool car park. Within about an hour, we'd exhausted all of the bags that we could possibly fill with rubbish. So that's why the rubbish collection stopped. So 30 people collected 20 bags of rubbish and some other chunky items. On the final trial, the 11th of April, was at the closure spot on the trial, and 40 people who were all just random members of the public this time, not a group that we'd activated, and staff giving up their staff time of a Saturday. And in a very short period of time, we did a very thorough investigation, what I would say was above and beyond, scrambling down banks and really hunting out the rubbish to come up with only 2 bags of rubbish and some car tyres that we suspect had been there for a very long time. My hypothesis at the start of this clean-up was that people don't take tyres into the town belt to throw them away, that it is vehicle access to this amenity that is creating all of the rubbish. That's neither here nor there, but I did want to point out that while we get support from the amenities group on a regular basis, they did not participate in any of these trials. The groups that were involved were Keep Dunedin Beautiful, the Town Belt Kaitiaki, who are actually school pupils across all of the different schools, the Dunedin Botanical Garden, because they relocated all their biodiversity signage, Sport Otago, because they provided stencils to use during the trial activation, and the New Zealand Police. There were also other schools involved, Arthur Street School, Otago Boys High School, the University of Otago, Geography and Surveying departments. And we do receive funding from the Amenity Society, but that is in mural painting work. They were absent from the trial procedures. Thank you.
Councillor van der Wes.
In my view, we didn't need to spend $28,000 to get the learnings that have been claimed from this trial. $28,000 of public funding, this is half for the DCC and half for NCTA, plus the many hours of transport team time, parks team time, and the involvement of all of these groups other than the AA, the representatives of the majority of the road users. Councillor Walker has said that useful real-world info was obtained showing that when the cars weren't able to be there and it was advertised as a walking and cycle route, that walking and cycling went up, and that at the end of the trial it went back down again. How this can be seen as useful real-world info, I don't know. To me, the supposed learnings are simple common sense. Anyone with common sense would have predicted any of the outcomes that we've had from this trial. We didn't need to spend the money to do it, and we don't need to waste our time now glorifying what has been a completely useless exercise in my view. Councillor Mayhem's claims about data on fly tipping, which she herself contradicts herself by saying that the data wasn't conclusive, are irrelevant. Of course, nobody is going to carry a heavy car tyre into the green belt if they have to carry it walking or cycling. That this is somehow a conclusion from a $28,000 trial, to me, is more absurdity, and it's obviously common sense. If we're going to consult with the public, if we're going to have a meaningful feedback from the public, we don't need, in this kind of case, to have a trial. All we have to do is we have to basically send out a flyer to residents and ask them what they think of a certain proposal. I think that would have been far cheaper. We would have reached far more people doing it. There wouldn't have been the accusations of vested interest groups or staff even having a view that was trying to be promoted through this trial. I think we could have avoided a lot of unpleasantness if we hadn't done the trial at all, but simply had a questionnaire or a referendum of some sort, which would have been a lot cheaper and reached a lot more people. I'm proud to say that I anticipated exactly the outcome of this trial, that people wouldn't be supportive of closing Queen's Drive, and that's why I voted against having the trial in the first place. But I accept that the majority of councillors around this table wanted it to happen, wanted it to be a success, wanted data to show that fly tipping was going to be substantially reduced, wanted data to show that there were immense numbers of people that wanted to walk and cycle on a road through the green belt. And, well, fair enough, we've got the result. We didn't need to spend $28,000 of public funds to get it.
The town belt is a great treasure for our city, and we talked about that when we passed the management plan previously. And this is where the trial goes back to, is how people appreciated the town belt and how they wanted to see the town belt used. And Councillor Mayhem raised the town belt kaitiaki, and I just want to give a shout out to the town belt Kaitiaki. There are 30 schools and early childhood centres within walking distance of the town belt, and we want those young people to be able to use it. They also care for it and spend quite a bit of time in there as well. We want more people to be able to enjoy the area. We are very, very fortunate in our city that our forebears chose to put this area aside for us and for us all to enjoy. The views are well known around the council table. It was 10 to 4 to do the trial, and it was a council decision, not a staff decision, so that needs to be very clear. And I also want to hold the comments about staff not being abused online. That is appalling that happened. I think a key learning was not to run a trial during an election time, and we could not have foreseen what happened that led to this becoming an election issue. And I'm aware it was an election issue for Councillor Gaylor, who said that she stood because of the town belt trial, and that was reported in the ODT on the 4th of February. So I think that Councillor Vanders is right in saying we would have avoided a lot of unpleasantness if we hadn't done the trial, and I think the learning is especially around election periods when that became quite vocal. We certainly have to learn by doing trials. It is an imperfect way of doing things, however, it is a way of doing things and a way of figuring out whether things will work. And I think about when we thought about the railway station as well as closing vehicular access to the railway station, and how that has affected people's access to that as well. I'm just trying to read all my notes. There were flyers that were sent to 400 locals that lived nearby. That was in the report, so the locals were engaged. We're always learning. We're learning about how we collect data better. These trials should be short and sweet and give us more information. I think we learnt when we did the Octagon trials around how to do better trials, and we are learning as we go along. Part of the what I learnt when we were across in New York was around those trials and around innovation and trying to do things differently, measuring success or not, and then thinking, well, how can we do better? And we are on a road to continuous improvement, and that is part of why we did this trial that was requested by council. I think I'll leave it at that and pass back to you, Marie, for your right of reply.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I have nothing to say except just repeat my profound gratitude to the staff. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now put the motion.
I was going to move an amendment to this.
Oh, okay.
To this motion, which I've been asked for the wording. So if we could put that up, please. And the reason why I have done this is because it just tightens up that last line a little bit more. And when we're talking about planning for the town belt, that we're also going to be doing the 10-year plan in the next few weeks and months ahead. So I thought that it was prudent to add in that within the life of the 2027-2037 long-term plan. Onto the end of that, I think it's fairly innocuous. I mean, we're talking about planning, so the long-term plan's coming up. And also that the $2 million set aside in the budget for this type of work, which was specifically tagged to cycleways, that we can reconsider that for redistribution as part of the upcoming 10-year plan discussions. I think it's okay to put that in there because it's. I think that's an extra piece of surety for the public. Given that we did have so many people interested in this issue and so many comments online, many of which were perfectly respectful, I would add, and while there may have been some that were unpleasant, that's always the case with an issue like this which polarises the community, and that is what the report pointed out. It did in fact divide the community. And I don't think it was particularly productive to dwell on and to talk to the public in a way that I think is a little bit disrespectful too. So I think given the gravitas of this issue, even though we're just calling it only a trial, I think it's important that we shore up this this motion with this addition. So I would like to put that.
Can we just clarify a word? There's the word retribution. Was the word supposed to be redistribution?
Sorry, yes, I do mean redistribution.
Pardon? Just give me. I just need an adjournment for some advice. Second to Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Those against, that's carried. So the right after. To go forward. Have you got a seconder? Councillor Lund seconded. Would anybody like to speak to it? Lund and then Treadwell.
This should be a straightforward, vote, because all we're asking council to do is what staff have advised us in paragraph 5D of the report, that there is no further action that is intended to be taken. So in order to repair some of the trust that the public are rightly suspicious of council, we can go, as I said before, some way to restoring that trust by doing what we say we're going to do, and say yes, this is not an issue in the foreseeable future. And I think if we don't do it, then there is going to be further polarising, there's going to be further distrust. So here's an opportunity, and I think we should take it, and I fully support it.
Okay, I'll just say that I do not support this, that I do not support taking $2 million out of the budget for the town belt for trials or changes to walking and cycling access. It was quite clear in some of the feedback, especially around the schools, that they would like us to consider that. Councillor Treadwell.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I think this goes way above and beyond what we just talked about. This mentions the town, like walking and cycling access within the town belt. This doesn't mention Queen's Drive, and I think it might tie our hands in a way that I personally would disagree with. We might want to put a path for better children's access through a part of the town belt, for example. And I don't think that that's quite the objection which is captured by the trial. I think this goes beyond it. Happy to debate that $2 million at the conventional time during the 10-year plan considerations, but I won't be supporting this motion.
Councillor Chambers and Councillor Vandervis.
Yes, just with the end of the sentence there, from and that the $2 million set aside budget, that part of the motion. How can we possibly make a decision on this kind of budget line and the amount of that amount on this information like that we have today, just presented to us like this? It's impossible. You can possibly make a $2 million budget line decision based on a brief paragraph. Well, I've no idea where this is in the budget. I have to do some research about it. So we can't possibly make a decision on this sort of matter in this way.
Councillor Vandervis.
What I believe shouldn't have happened was the $2 million budget line going in the first place with very little support for it. Having had the trial, we now realise that the support isn't there, and I think it's quite entirely appropriate, especially in this straitened times, that nice-to-haves like $2 million worth of potentially cycleways through the Greenbelt should simply be shelved. We can't afford to keep coming up with these, what have proved to be from this trial, unpopular attempts to further produce carbon zero aims using a great deal of public funding when the public is not wholly supportive of it. The trial shows that the particular green belt proposal to put these cycleways through the green belt are not popular. We should simply accept that and put the $2 million back where it belongs, into debt repayment or somewhere where it could be more usefully spent.
Councillor Mayhem.
I won't be supporting this. I'd just like to remind everyone that we had members of the community come and approach us around a city traverse where walking and cycling the town belt needed better safety for active transport. The Mayor mentioned there are 30 schools and kindergartens in the area, and I want to keep our tamariki safe. While fly tipping has reduced since we've introduced our city bin system, I seem to remember a statistic which I'm hoping is out of date now, but we spend up to $300,000 a year on the collection of dumped items. And a big shout out, and I forgot to mention this earlier in my speech, one of the groups involved, of course, was Task Force Green, and they are our volunteer army that do so many wonderful things across the city, particularly supporting Keep Dunedin Beautiful in our clean-up activities. Again, I will not support this change. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
I can't support this in any way, shape or form. 2 points. The staff have made it clear in the paper what the intention is in terms of trials. I fully respect that, and I'm sure we'll keep a watching eye. And secondly, as Councillor Treble points out, there's a time and a place. It's called the LTP to talk about what happens with the 2 million.
Councillor Hall.
I can't support this either. Let us accept the outcome of the trial without turning this into a decision about the 10-year plan.
Thank you. Councillor Gailey, your right of reply.
This is $2 million that effectively could easily go into repaying debt.
I'll just adjourn for a second while I check. So just let me. I don't know. I'll just check. Just move an adjournment.
Another attempt to shut me down?
No, Councillor Gayle, we have standing orders that we are following. I'm moving an adjournment. Seconded, Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Standing orders. Whoever pointed it out might like to have another read of the standing orders. Thank you. Your right of reply.
Thanks very much. So yeah, the $2 million is money that we could use elsewhere, and I think it's a great gesture given that we did have a strong public showing on this issue. And also the other issue that we've had a strong public showing on is the actual estimates in the annual plan itself, and the lack of ability for this council to actually find savings to assist our worn-out ratepayers who are struggling with their rates bills. So I think that it's a good gesture to do. It costs us nothing. I do know that the $2 million was tagged to any cycleway improvements. Had we actually gone ahead with what was touted that we were meant to do, which is to decide either or, whether or not we close the town belt to traffic or keep it open, then the $2 million would have been used to enable the closing of the town belt. So it is specifically tagged to this issue, and therefore I don't see any problem in actually asking for that to be redistributed now as part of this motion and put forward for the 10-year plan discussions as a redistributed piece of resource that we could use for something else. So I'm hopeful that you will all see the sense, and the ratepayer desire is for us to save money, to vote for this fantastic amendment, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, and I'll just remind Councillor Laws just to pull up the standing order number so that we're not flicking through the book. And I do remind Councillor Gaylor that there was no intention to shut you down, that I allowed this amendment to go on despite it was against standing orders and the former person had the right of reply. Now I'll put this by division.
Councillor Chambers.
No.
Councillor Gaylor.
Yes.
Councillor Gary.
No.
Councillor Hall.
No.
Councillor Lafiso.
No.
Councillor Lund.
Yes.
Councillor Mayhem.
No.
Councillor Treadwell.
No.
Councillor Vandervis.
Yes.
Councillor Weatherall.
No.
Professor Wyeth.
No.
Mayor Barker.
No. Oh, did we miss Walker?
Oh, sorry. Apologies, Councillor Walker.
No.
Sorry.
That's, you should come after Lee.
It's doing its thing. Motion lost 10-3. Apologies again.
Right, we'll now put the substantive motion and we'll put that by division as well.
Councillor Chambers.
Yes.
Councillor Gaylor. No. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Yes.
Councillor Lafiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lund.
Yes.
Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Councillor Treadwell.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
Yes.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Weatherall.
Aye.
Professor Wyeth.
Yes.
Mayor Barker.
Aye. It is carry. Oh, you're waiting for it to do its thing.
Just doing its thing, and it's taking its time. Sorry. Holy moly. Declared carried 12-1.
Right, we'll move on to item 9, submission for the summary offences move on orders amendment bill, and I can't see Nicola, Ms. Miranda Shee on leave, or am I blind? No, okay. We've got Ms. Huako and Ms. Tolson, Manager Community Partnerships and Policy Analyst, to respond to any questions. Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I see this is a letter that's been sent by yourself, Mayor Sophie, in your position as chairman of this committee, and it contains a lot of detail on comments on the bill and aspects of it, some of which are critical, clearly. Can you just remind us of the process as to why you had to do this letter yourself and why we weren't able to debate it and discuss it prior to it being sent off?
So this was about timing because this is a process, I guess, that is often followed when there is a deadline and there's no council meeting about it, so we don't call an urgent council meeting. So the policy team wrote that according to the policies that the council have as well, and the analysis.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Treadwell, are you wishing to move this?
Happy to speak to that.
I'll second it. I'll second it. Yes, thank you.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. Just for some context, at the previous meeting of the Policy and Planning Subcommittee, I raised this as an issue for the Chair's consideration. And then following that meeting, staff prepared a written submission. The Council was invited to give an oral presentation to the committee, which I fronted. Always a pleasure to speak to our colleagues in Wellington. I believe it was incumbent on the Council to present a submission because of this bill's stark disagreement with our own policies around preventing homelessness. To give effect to our housing plan, Council staff work proactively with local police, central government departments, social agencies to care for the city's homeless whānau, and that includes connecting them to health providers, mental health and other aspects of wraparound support, and facilitating and supporting them into accommodation, especially now that we have stood up our homeless outreach service. Staff are doing really awesome work here with the resources available to them. But by contrast, this bill takes a punitive approach to the behaviours associated with homelessness, and it provides new powers to criminalise those behaviours. In doing so, it has the potential to undermine the relationship between our staff, our homeless constituents, and the many wonderful organisations in the city doing real work to support them. It also, importantly, it shifts the burden of responsibility onto the police, which is an outcome that the Police Association does not want. During the public submission process, Steve Watt submitted against this bill on behalf of the Police Association, and he noted that the bill risks drawing police back into managing these broader social issues, while at the very same time the organisation of the police was stepping back from those frontline mental health responses. Quote here is, "We don't want to target those with mental health, physical health or financial issues. That is not our role, and where would we move them to? Move on orders will just displace the problem." Steve Watts also noted that the police already have powers to deal with the disorderly and offensive conduct under the Summary Offences Act, and as such the bill has an aspect of redundancy to it. The approach that we take in Dunedin is mindful of the fact that it's often the most vulnerable people in our city that are being perceived as a threat to public safety. So the people who are facing extreme hardship, often with complex needs relating to mental health and addiction, they are likely to be most affected by this bill. Vulnerable people often live in the visible parts of the city because those are the safe parts of the city, where there's people and light and facilities that are less likely to put them in dangerous situations. If a result of this legislation is that vulnerable people are pushed out of those visible spaces, it'll increase the likelihood of material harm to those people. It's been suggested that move-on orders might be deployed to direct people to shelters or other social agencies, but I don't believe that a legal mechanism is necessary for that purpose, particularly, again, in light of the fact that we have stood up an in-house homeless outreach service. So if the intent of this bill is to protect the public from harm, it's unclear how it will achieve this given what we've heard from the Police Association. If the intent is to shift homeless people away from visible public spaces, it's my concern that will put those people at risk of greater harm. And if the intent is to use the powers to direct people to support services, I would suggest that it's redundant, particularly in the context of Dunedin City. An effective approach to tackling homelessness is one that addresses the needs of homeless people, and most immediately that means housing, but also recognising their need for support, community and recognition. By effectively criminalising behaviours associated with homelessness, this bill takes a punitive approach which lacks compassion and which is likely to be ineffective. On the topic of compassion, and on a personal note, what really prompted me to bring this to the last Policy and Planning Committee was my position on the youth portfolio. I think there's an awareness around the table of an increase in housing deprivation around the city, but it might surprise you to learn that it is children and young people who are experiencing homelessness more than any other age group. I'm going to quote University of Otago Professor Neville Pearce on this. "Children and young people do not choose to live on the street. Many have left unsafe homes, experienced family breakdown, become too old for state care, or have nowhere else to go. Yet emergency, transitional and public housing can be difficult for young people aged 14 to 17 to access. While we should absolutely welcome efforts to reduce homelessness, we shouldn't recognise homelessness to be a problem of criminality, but one of material deprivation and one of health that we are all responsible for. People can't be punished into health, and they can't be punished into prosperity. So I don't think we as a council should support the new powers outlined in this bill. They effectively criminalise behaviour that's not inherently harmful, and they could undermine our local efforts to address city safety and to support people experiencing homelessness and poverty. Mauri ora, thank you.
Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie. I want to start by making it clear that I absolutely respect the right of this council to challenge central government policy, and there are times when we have a responsibility to do so. However, I do not agree with the frequency we seem to submit to government, and I don't agree we always get the return on the cost and staff resources a lot of submissions take. I have two concerns with the way we've approached this submission. I do understand the timing pressures, but I don't think that it is good process to present a council position prior to councillors having the opportunity to debate and vote on it. Secondly, having considered the submission, I question whether we have made enough of an effort to find common ground. There are legitimate concerns about protecting vulnerable people, and I accept those concerns. But there are also legitimate concerns about intimidating, disruptive and obstructive behaviour in public places, and the effect that can have on businesses and on people's willingness to use our central city. Rather than concentrating so heavily on what we believe is wrong with the government's proposal, I would have preferred if we offered more practical solutions, perhaps clearer thresholds for when move on powers should apply, protections for passive rough sleeping, or safeguards for vulnerable people. There is an important difference between someone simply being homeless and someone behaving in a persistently disruptive, intimidating, or antisocial manner. Surely there is a middle ground where we can protect vulnerable people while still giving police appropriate tools to deal with behaviour that genuinely impacts the safety and enjoyment of our public spaces. For me, a submission to government is at its strongest when it doesn't simply say what we oppose, but constructively explains how we think it could be made better. I am not convinced this submission has achieved that balance. For those reasons, while I respect the majority view of Council, I cannot endorse a submission opposing legislation that reflects an intent the majority of George Street retailers agree with. Thank you.
Councillor Lund, then Councillors Walker and Mayhem.
Following on from Councillor Weatherall's comments, I just want to point out that I probably have more experience with homeless people than all of you. I live amongst 30 previously homeless people, soon to be 41, and I have seen the issues that they have with their safety when there are previous partners, associates, and the police do need the tools to move people on, to diffuse situations, to de-escalate, to get rid of them, and 24 hours can make a huge difference. It can resolve a lot of issues just with some time and some space. And if we think that there aren't disorderly, intimidating and threatening behaviours going on, and it may not be deliberate, it may just simply be that there's mental health problems, that people haven't taken their meds, there's all those sorts of issues. But I can say from experience that this is definitely needed from what I've seen, and I accept what Councillor Weatherall has said, that the retailers also need to be protected if we're going to have Dunedin's city centre as a vibrant economic. And that is not to say that we shouldn't do everything we can to help the homeless. I'm I'm doing that myself, and the council has done that. But there has to be limits to behaviour, and there has to be consequences, and we have to protect safety.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Sophie. Thanks as ever to the staff for the submission, and thanks to the mover and the seconder. I fully support the submission actually, and won't repeat much of the eloquent overview given by Councillor Treadwell, and I think we should be grateful that we have him advocating for the city in this particular space, and I'm very happy to have him as a partner on the environment and youth portfolio. He has an advantage on one of those aspects of that portfolio. Firstly, for me, and I'll be quite brief here, firstly, the fact that the police don't support this speaks volumes to me, and I think Councillor Treadwell went more into the reasons behind that, but I think it's a fascinating aspect of this bill in general. Also for me, the bill absolutely risk criminalising homelessness, and I do respect a lot of what you've said, Councillor Weatherall, but the bill does absolutely risk criminalising homelessness and poverty while doing very little, I think, to address the underlying causes, and I think that's a bit of a tragedy, and that goes across all governments for a long time, actually. More than a century ago, when I was researching this, colonial New Zealand law actually allowed people to be prosecuted as vagrants if they could not explain how they supported themselves. And when you read the bill, there's definitely uncomfortable echoes of that approach in the proposed legislation. I think it's sort of an example of not really learning from experience in the past. And like its Victorian era predecessor, the bill reflects a view that people on society's margins should be managed through the criminal justice system rather than through social support. And we're hearing a plethora of reasons why that's broken down and not working, and it's not invested in. Debates for another day, I guess, particularly up in the beehive up there. For me as well, we already have laws that enable the police, and again, the mover alluded to this, to arrest people for violent and disorderly behaviour, so I shouldn't lose sight of that, and that should be done. But this proposed law change smacks of tragically penalising people for being poor in public. That's really how I read it. It penalises people for being poor in public, and for me, as a councillor and as a human being, punishing people for being poor will never, ever get my support around this table. Thank you.
Councillor Mayhem.
The DCC's position on the move-on orders is it risks criminalising low-level, non-harmful behaviours, undermining our own local supportive approach of the outreach program, and also youth safety. Current laws already cover disorder. Specifically, the move-on orders are around begging, rough sleeping, disorderly behaviour, obstructing businesses, and breaching the peace. So the police already have current laws around the Offences Act, Trespass Act, Local Government Act around addressing threatening, obstructive or intimidating behaviour without having to add these move-on powers. We're criminalising poverty. Begging is a passive poverty-related behaviour that could be made criminalised if they're non-compliant. It harms people sleeping rough. It can reduce their safety by pushing them into a less lit, less patrolled area and making them less willing to engage with our outreach services. It's counterproductive for this cross-agency work. It puts expectations on the police where no safety issue exists. It diverts resources and impends on our supportive responses. We already heard from the police it risks drawing them back into the frontline response. It's not their role. They shouldn't be dealing with mental health issues, and it displaces the problem. There's confusion over these risks and the definition of begging, and it overlaps with permitted activities such as busking or fundraising, creating enforcement ambiguity. Also, our position aligns with our DCC strategy that supports our housing plan, our social wellbeing strategy, and prioritises housing as a human right, and our proactive outreach support over these punitive measures. So I very much would like to thank Councillor Treadwell for speaking to the Justice Committee and raising this at our last meeting, and also to Mayor Sophie for writing a letter on behalf of the DCC. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gaylor.
I agree with Councillor Weatherall on this. It's disappointing to see a submission come to this council retrospectively without the ability to debate it. As I've been continually told today, process is important, and yet in this case we've not had the opportunity to follow it. This legislation that the government is introducing is important. Ask Dunedin people who are regularly yelled at and abused on the main street or in public places. Do they agree with the legislation? I'm sure some would, some may not, but some would. It's our job to support our community in all its forms and from all walks of life. There is a strong focus in the submission on homeless people, or rather people who may not be homeless, as is sometimes the case, and who discourage others from simply being in our public areas through their behaviour. These are often not, contrary to what Councillor Mayhem says, non-harmful behaviours. This is not passive, non-criminal behaviour in every instance. I would say that there are people, and I believe Councillor Weatherall is one, who have been intimidated by people exhibiting these sometimes confrontational and at times threatening and violent behaviours. We also correspondingly have a police system which is overwhelmed and unable to deal with this. So the government is left with no choice but to introduce legislation to specifically target this. So I do not support this submission at all as representing the council view. I'm disappointed that it was put up as representing the council view without our debate first. And secondly, I support the legislation itself.
Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank Mayor Sophie for submitting this submission to the government, and also Councillor Treadwell and support the comments he and other councillors have made in this with regard to this matter. These move-on laws seem to be very popular. It's a very small world nowadays, and it's interesting that similar legislation has been introduced in other countries with the exact same phrase, move on. And it sounds very simplistic and sort of benign to gently ask somebody to move on. But the reality is that these laws are attached to making behaviour, criminalising behaviour, and around the world, the same sort of populist type people support these laws, and other people oppose them. And those who are leading them on opposing these sort of laws are the law enforcement and justice services, who do not think these sort of laws will work and be effective. So thank you for submitting the submission, and I'll be supporting it.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to acknowledge Councillor Treadwell for the excellent work he has done on the submission and representing Dunedin so thoroughly and with compassion before the Justice Committee, and Mayor Sophie for putting this forward. The police do not support this, and I simply do not understand how fining people who are homeless will help anything. It feels a bit like saying, let them eat cake. I would like to think Dunedin as a city has a heart. We should be helping vulnerable people into housing and support, not pushing them elsewhere or punishing them for having nowhere to go. I strongly support this submission.
Councillor Lofiso.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I just want to acknowledge the corporate policy staff for again, excellent work in preparing the submission. And as others have said, thank you, Mayor Sophie, for signing it, and thank you to your eloquent speech, Councillor Treadwell. I just think that those people who are speaking against it, and I acknowledge Councillor Weatherall's, acknowledgement of our need to submit. But those of you, I just think that people who are speaking against it because of behavioural problems of homeless people, I think you've got no idea of how people live, and I think you should stop punching down. How many of you actually talk to the people on the streets and find out how long they've been without a home. And you know, maybe to me, everything is connected. You know, we talk about making the city livable or more livable for those who can afford to live here. But we must acknowledge there are hungry children, there are hungry whānau, there are unhoused whānau. We can't really call ourselves a city of any respect if we're not actually focusing considerable energy on them. And you know, it may sound raving to you, but I recommend to you a book by Clara Matei, who has been talking about escape from capitalism. That's the title of her latest book. She talks about $30 million US, I assume, per hour that extracted from the global south to the global north. Some of us around this table are from the global north, and our people, most of them, are from the global south.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be supporting the motion, and others have very eloquently explained the thinking behind this. I too want to acknowledge the considerable amount of work to put together the submission and thank Councillor Treadwell for fronting it, because that's important to be heard. However, I just want to briefly say that in terms of process, this is perfectly within process. This government in particular, over the last few years, have, during its term, sent out or drafted up bills and given consultation periods which are ridiculously short. And we have coming at us all kinds of incredibly impactful bills, draft bills, to submit on. And yes, we choose to do so because that's part of democracy, and it does impact on our residents. And it is our role to make sure that we are represented. And I note that it was said earlier in the debate that the staff drafted up the submission following council policy. They did not make this up, they followed council current policy. Now, you might disagree with current policy, but this has been drafted according to that. So it's not the first time that we've had to retrospectively sign off a submission. Is it ideal? No, but that's not caused by us, that's caused by the government. And thank you to Mayor Sophie for signing this off. And I'll just leave you with the final comment that we are judged as a society by how we treat the most vulnerable.
And I'll just follow up. I certainly take on board what Councillor Weatherill talks about, the homelessness and then the behavioural aspect, and unlinking them I think is important as well, because when we look at some of the behaviour, which we've all seen, particularly on our main street, we really would like better policing around that, given what we've seen. But this was really around a number of things, including homelessness, and I think that's why we decided or made a decision to submit for this. And as Councillor Gary has pointed out, this is sometimes we do this in between meetings, especially with the short-term consultation process, and given there's a whole lot of legislation about to come through, that is of concern as well. Other councillors brought up about the concerns from the police. There's also concerns from the Ministry of Justice and the Attorney General about the Bill of Rights, or the unjustified limit on rights, and judges have recognised that people expressing housing insecurity often find themselves in the criminal justice system. And on Radio New Zealand this morning there was talk about when people are released from prison and they are on medication, is there's no follow-up for that medication, so unfortunately those behaviours often play out on our streets, and we actually need a better justice system, a better mental health system, but we're not addressing those in the submission. I really want to thank the council policy team, because the council policy team write these according to our strategies and our policy positions, and those are what are contained within this. I will give it back to you, Councillor Treadwell, for your right of reply, and then I'll put the motion.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I'll just try and quickly whip through some of these responses, and thanks everybody for their comments. Councillor Weatherall, I do think that's a salient point around submissions being balanced and not wholeheartedly negative in their engagement. I do note that in the submission we approved of the intent of the bill to prevent harm in as much as it was presented, but I think it's so at odds with our existing policy, it was hard to find a common ground there, but I appreciate what you're saying. Councillor Lund, I don't want to minimise, and I appreciate your work with our homeless constituents. With regard to powers around intimidating and disruptive behaviour, unquestionable that these happen in our city. But I think given the view of the police, who we do work closely with as an organisation, our impression is that these aren't the tools that they want for that job. Thank you to Councillor Walker for his kind words, and thank you to Councillor Mayhem for reiterating the point raised by the Police Association regarding this issue. Councillor Gaylor, that we are debating this now is the correct process in this instance. It's not irregular for us to seek retrospective approval for submissions in instances where the submission time falls between meetings. Councillor Chamber, it's a really good observation about the similarities between this and like international other international legislation, and I think it really highlights the intent of submitting on this bill. It's us explaining our local context in response to an overarching proposal. Councillor Hall, again, thank you for your kind comments, and Councillor Lafiso, thanks for the sober commentary around the wider context of this issue. Councillor Gary, thank you for reminding us about the context around the submission. It was one of either 6 or 9 pieces of legislation that were out for consultation at the same time, which is why there was such a limited window to really get on top of it. And thank you, Your Worship, for your summary and commentary, and also expanding the context a little around the Justice Department as well. Finally, huge thanks to the council policy team for doing the real work here of researching and articulating how this proposed legislation interacts with our existing policy, which is very complicated, and which they did in a very short period of time. Ka mihi.
Put the motion by division.
Councillor Chambers.
Aye.
Councillor Gaylor.
No.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Lafiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lund.
No.
Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Councillor Treadwell.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Weatherall.
No.
Professor Wyeth.
Aye.
Mayor Barker.
Aye.
So slow, sorry.
I think we can add faster than that machine. Good
No.
gracious.
I don't know why it's doing this. I apologise.
I'll put motion carried, shall we?
Yeah.
And we can move on to items for consideration by the chair. And Councillor has sent me the correct standing order for the right of reply 20.12. The mover of an original motion has the right of reply. A mover of an amendment to the original motion does not. So that is another learning for today. Does anyone else have any other items for consideration by the chair? Therefore, I will close with a karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te urutapa nui, kia wātia, kia mama, te kako, te tinana te wairua i te ara takatu, koia ra I roko whakairea aki ki roka, kia tina, huie, taikie. I declare the meeting is closed. Sorry, it says date the time, 12:02.
Mayor Sophie, can you